Though it was months before Robert was actually crowned, he won the throne at the Battle of the Trident by personally slaying Rhaegar Targaryen. When people think of Robert getting the throne, they think of this moment and the battle that preceded it. When Catelyn sees Loras Tyrell for the first time, she thinks he could not have been more than 2 when Robert slew Prince Rhaegar on the Trident. That's the touchstone moment, the milestone point, the decisive blow, the most important hammer strike in the history of Westeros. To be fair, we start during Robert's reign, and of course, the story of how the current king became king is pretty important. But even after Robert dies, people still talk about it. It's still very important. And we aren't even given a mental image of Robert being crowned, the actual ceremony, whatever it was. We don't have any detail, really. You'd think it'd be kind of a big deal. Not just a new king, a new house on the throne after almost 3 centuries. Sure, Robert was a Targaryen cousin, but it is still a new house. Ned doesn't think of the coronation, nor does anyone else who was there, and we have several possibilities. Jaime and Cersei. I mean, Cersei does give us a mental image of marrying Robert, but not of him being crowned. Maybe she wasn't even there for it, but if she was, she doesn't think about it. Davos might have been there. He was something of a hero or a new figure given his switch from life of crime to rescuing Stannis. So good chance he was there, but he doesn't think about it either. Nor do characters without POVs describe it, like Tywin or Pycelle or Roose Bolton, all of whom were likely there as well. No, the focus again is on these decisive moments, the battle and the moment Robert killed Rhaegar, and not the moment it became official through ceremony months later. And while the war was full of important and compelling aspects and events worthy of discussion and focus, this battle by itself can make that claim. The very spot where Rhaegar fell became immortalized afterwards. It got the name the Ruby Ford for the rubies that fell from his crushed breastplate, and people still search for Rhaegar's rubies to this day. But of course, so much more happened there apart from Robert versus Rhaegar. Many famous individuals, some who survived, some who did not, and tens of thousands of nameless other soldiers. We meet many characters throughout A Song of Ice and Fire who were there, or who had family who were, people whose lives or livelihoods depended on the outcome. Some have visible scars or missing limbs. Some have suffered no physical harm, but were never quite the same afterwards. They gossip on the wall that Donal Noy had forged Robert's warhammer, quote, the one that crushed the life from Rhaegar Targaryen on the Trident. It's even mentioned as part of the House Frey entry in the appendix of A Clash of Kings, where they were. The origin of their nickname is described here, quote,
when Robert Baratheon met Rhaegar Targaryen on the Trident, the Freys did not arrive until the battle was done, and thereafter Lord Hoster Tully always called Lord Walder the late Lord Frey.
And Lord Hoster Tully was, of course, there and was his overlord who ordered him to be there. So, yeah. Who said tragic battles that put the continent and perhaps humanity in the balance can't have a little humor thrown in, right? All that and more on this episode of History of Westeros podcast. Hello and welcome, everybody. It's another happy Sunday, another good time to be discussing A Song of Ice and Fire. We're really narrowing it down this time. Battle episodes aren't something we've done a lot of. It's not the first time, but it has been a while. This battle particularly important and meaningful, and as I indicated here in the intro, gets name dropped quite often.
Hard to have a lot of discussion about battle details for this episode. Like, there's a lot surrounding it, but the actual battle, there's not a lot of detail we know.
That's true. We don't have a lot of, like, troop movements and then the left surged forward under... Yeah, we don't have that kind of stuff. So it is a different sort of battle analysis. You're right, Sean. That's a great point to make here, kicking it off. But also, I like being able to get really close to these certain important events. I think maybe in the future we do one on the sack of King's Landing, which came just after, or the flight to Dragonstone and Dany and Viserys heading overseas. Little things like that where we've talked about them before, but we haven't really focused in on them because there's a lot more detail to be highlighted, a lot of interesting decisions and moments, and, well, we'll get to that. Sean, you got anything special in the cup today?
Pretty standard bang, raspberry, naked, protein berry and black raspberry sparkling ice.
You're doing sort of in the league of the color of my thermos.
Mm-hmm.
Shout out to our good friend Nina, aka Good Queen Allie. Good Queen Allie with one L, or sorry, one L. Yes, one L, one Y. Two N's, two O's, two E's, but yeah, one L. Her latest post is pretty relevant to this one. It talks about how Sansa's arguing with her father about, oh, I love him, referring to Joffrey, and how she might be able to convince the king to make her father stay in King's Landing after his intent to leave, but she's a little afraid of Robert because of, you know, how his piece is presented. And Nina noticed how a lot of this is similar to how Lyanna would have felt at the time. She was in love with Rhaegar, apparently, and was stubborn about it, and was a little afraid of Robert because she didn't want to marry him, because for different reasons than Sansa's afraid of him, because Sansa's not faced with marrying Robert. But still, Robert is worked into this story too, which helps make the comparison to Lyanna even tighter. So check that post out, as well as her other posts in general. Really good stuff. And she's got a lot of takes in this episode as well. Speaking of Nina, she is our guest next week as well to talk about the Baelor the Blessed, a character that's popped up quite a bit. We'll be getting deep into his story and all the things that happened during his reign, some guesses, some fun, some dreams, some comparisons, real world stuff, other fiction. You got it. We'll get there. If this episode ends and you want to stay immersed, well, this episode is going to end. It will not go forever. We've got you covered.
A big if.
Yeah, it's a big if. No, we'll just keep going. This is the infinite stream. We'll have you covered with suggestions for topics related to this one. Also, at the end, the answer to this trivia question, which is, which participant in this battle on the side of the rebels / Robert, Ned, etc., slew 3 landed knights or lords in of the Narrow Sea?
Will you say that again? It's not written, so I need to type it out.
3 knights.
Which participant slew 3
knights or lords of the Narrow Sea during this battle?
Okay.
Which rebel? Yeah.
Which rebel participant?
Well, the lords of the Narrow Sea, of course, are Rhaegar's bannermen.
Yeah,
so that,
so-
yeah.
yeah.
Anyway. First mentions. It's such a huge part of A Song of Ice and Fire, as I indicated in the intro. It appears in multiple POVs very early in Book 1. So much of the where are they now, which is when we first see them, was determined by the Battle of the Trident. Not only is this Dany 1 we're about to quote, but it's one of the earliest paragraphs in Dany 1.
Viserys had been a boy of 8 when they fled King's Landing to escape the advancing armies of the usurper. But Daenerys had been only a quickening in their mother's womb. I'll say that again then. But Daenerys had been only a quickening in their mother's womb. Yet sometimes Dany would picture the way it had been. So often had her brother told her the stories. The midnight flight to Dragonstone, moonlight shimmering on the ship's black sails, her brother Rhaegar battling the usurper in the bloody waters of the Trident and dying for the woman he loved.
Now, that's a little bit exaggerated. This is part of Viserys' brooding. It's the version Dany has been told. Robert slaying Rhaegar, that, of course, that was a big deal, and that really did happen. It was a chaotic scene, as battles tend to be, and the sheer mass of men was large enough. But for another, Robert didn't have to win against Rhaegar. Rhaegar was a really good fighter. It could have been Rhaegar who won that day. And, you know, neither of them necessarily were at full strength when they finally came together. They may have suffered wounds. We know Rhaegar did wound Robert during their exchange, but they may have both had a, you know, damaged shoulder or wounded leg. Who knows? Nothing that's necessarily visible or obvious, but they may not have been at 100%. They had been fighting prior to that moment. Nina says it really is almost too story-like, except that it really did happen that way. There was a lot more happening in the rebellion before the Trident, and a lot more happening than simply these two going at it. But it's so easy to focus on this duel because it does feel like a microcosm of the whole conflict. Rhaegar and Robert and all their men around them, and the two most important guys on either side. It's almost like a trial by combat. It's almost like everybody else could have just stood back and just let these two go at it and just, no one else needs to die. Let's just have these two fight.
Keep that in mind. I'm going to make a point about that later.
So Nina says, for a little boy who was hearing all about this secondhand, that outcome of the battle would have been all too easy to think about like a story without the complex political and wartime context to it. It was a great point. Like, Viserys doesn't have all this other detail. He was only a child when all this happened, and he didn't have some adult to set him straight necessarily. I don't know that Willem Darry was there either. So he may not have known it all, and even if he did, he might have exaggerated, maybe in the same bitterness. So might have been mixed in some of the same ways. You could argue that Robert was a heavy favorite, but he was mad. He was enraged. He had some false pretenses planted in his mind about what had actually happened between Rhaegar and Lyanna. But we're not here to trace out the events of them and Harrenhal and all that. Not to find detail. A little bit of context is important. But the end result of their saga, there were so many mysteries remaining. It did clearly play a major role in sparking the war that led to this battle, even if it's still filled with a lot of mystery. For example, Robert personally, because he believed Rhaegar was a cruel, kidnapping rapist. I mean, in pretty much any society ever, real or fictional, you're supposed to take quick and definitive action when someone does that sort of thing to your fiancé. And especially in this society, when you're a big, manly man who has a warhammer and stands 6'6". Like, everybody knows what you're going to do. But if something like that happens, of course, did it actually happen? That's, again, a separate question. He certainly thought he did, especially when that person's villainous father just did horrible things to your best friend's family. I mean, Robert's full of motivation here. Like, you killed my best friend's dad and brother and murdered my my fiance. Like, that's terrible, right? Well, not murder, but etc. A huge list of motivations, any way you put it. And in many ways, he really saw himself as a hero, and a lot of people saw him as that afterwards. But in many ways, he really was. But Rhaegar, the guy he killed, may have been trying to save humanity, which that's probably more important. If he was actually right that he was doing that, which is another big open question that is not for today to tackle, but is important to acknowledge.
Worth noting, even if he was, definitively, if we found some proof, it becomes clear in the next book, Rhaegar was trying to save humanity. Yeah. Robert still doesn't know that.
No, he doesn't. He has no clue. He didn't know that even when he died. No one ever told him that at any point. So I doubt he even heard it to laugh at it. Like, of course he didn't think that. That's ridiculous. No, I doubt he even heard the idea. Like, it was never even floated to him, probably. So the repercussions of Robert's victory were immediate and long-lasting. The heroic vengeance he sought was, of course, seen in a different light by House Targaryen. For one thing, there's that bit about Rhaegar dying for the woman he loved, which isn't particularly true. He may have truly loved Lyanna, and vice versa, and he may have also loved his actual wife, Elia, and vice versa, despite all the drama around them. But he didn't die for them. Again, he was trying to save the world or something. And their lives weren't necessarily even at stake. I mean, it's not like Robert was going to kill Lyanna if he won, so he didn't know she was about to die in childbirth. Like, for all he knew, she was still alive. And, well, she was still alive, but anyway, that's beside the point. The point is that Dany thinks Rhaegar was a good, honorable, and noble person. And in some ways, she's right. So both sides see this in black and white, and they're both wrong to do it that way, but they're both also very limited as to their information. They don't have the whole story. So you can see why, from Dany's point of view, Robert and his ilk could easily be perceived as villainous. Look what happened right after they won. Tywin sacked King's Landing. Elia, Aegon, and Rhaenys were brutally killed. Like, how's that the good guys, right? Like, from a Daenerys' perspective, yeah. So that serves to set up the cyclical dynastic blood sport Dany is thrust into from the moment she's born. And she gets to hear lines like this in her first chapter.
I shall kill the usurper myself, he promised, who had never killed anyone, as he killed my brother Rhaegar, and Lannister too, the Kingslayer, for what he did to my father.
That would be most fitting, Magister Illyrio said. Dany saw the smallest hint of a smile playing around his full lips, but her brother did not notice. Nodding, he pushed back a curtain and stared off into the night, and Dany knew he was fighting the Battle of the Trident once again.
Of course, he's just imagining fighting it. He was not there, as we said. He was only 8 when the battle happened, and he was nowhere near it. But still, her first chapter, Battle of the Trident, Rhaegar's death, mentioned twice in short order. Soon enough, we have Jon Snow's first chapter, and even he refers to the Battle of the Trident while thinking about how disappointing Robert looks. Like, that's the guy that Did that? Okay, all right. Well, I'm not impressed. Well, yeah, well, he killed your father, John, so you shouldn't be too impressed. Meanwhile, at Winterfell, Eddard's first chapter as well, continuing at Winterfell rather, it features his reunion with Robert. Ned is a man who kind of represses his memories, I guess. It's part of the way his chapters are written, but many of them come flooding back when they head down to the crypts, though he keeps it mostly to himself, as is his manner in general. Robert is pretty extroverted, though.
I sit on that damnable iron chair and listen to them complain until my mind is numb and my ass is raw. They all want something, money or lands or justice. The lies they tell, and my lords and ladies are no better. I'm surrounded by flatterers and fools. Can drive a man to madness, Ned. Half of them don't dare tell me the truth, and the other half can't find it. There are nights I wish we had lost at the Trident. Not truly, but...
I understand, Ned said softly.
What a setup. He's like, all right, you do understand, don't you? All right, hand to the king. I'm going to name you. Like, oh, man. So, yeah. But he and Ned are but two of the many characters we already know fairly well. Robert, we've talked about a lot already. We'll have a little more about him. But there's so many other characters that we're going to talk about. We're going to retrace, relive, imagine, discuss the ones who we know to have been there. For most of the characters there, it was the biggest battle they ever fought in, until perhaps the events of the books maybe started to supplant that. And it echoes loudly into the current generation. Again, like we just read through these several examples, but it also comes up in, besides Dany 1, Jon 1, Eddard 1, Eddard 2, Eddard 3, Eddard 4. It finally takes a break for a few chapters until Ned's leg takes an actual break, and then then he has dreams, and it comes back, and he's thinking about it again, the Tower of Joy and all that stuff. But there, it just keeps coming. Ned maybe stops thinking about it, but Sansa thinks of it once, Bran thinks of it once or twice. Then a Clash of Kings starts with Dany announcing that she's naming one of her dragons thusly.
I would name them all for those the gods have taken. The green one shall be Rhaegar, for my valiant brother who died on the green banks of the Trident.
There's a lot more examples, but I think you get the point. And a few more of them will pop up here and there, but let's get a little bit more to it. But first, Nina's going to mention here that there's a good amount of inspiration for the Battle of the Trident from the Battle of Bosworth Field. Battle of Bosworth Field was basically the final battle of the Wars of the Roses, at least the early stages when Richard was killed. And that's very similar because Richard was like a bit of like a Rhaegar figure, and they didn't actually fight. Henry and Richard did. They were really close to each other, like Nina says, within feet of each other. It was the decisive battle. It was the battle that got Henry crowned King of England, and of course, this is the Plantagenet dynasty. So there would be 300 years of Plantagenet rule, which is kind of the opposite, where this ended 300 years of Targaryen rule. But the similarities are there. There's even Richard supposedly yelling, traitors, 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 as he's killed, which Rhaegar didn't do, but Aerys, his father, did. So you can see some inspiration. George, rather, big fan of that period of history. So anytime there's something that seems similar there, it's a pretty good likelihood he's taking direct inspiration. Sean, you noticed a few other connections as well there?
Yep, there was a Lord Stanley that was ostensibly on the side of Richard. And he was there with his armies. But when they started fighting, he held back. And one of his sons was in Richard's retinue. And he threatened him. He sent a message like, I'm going to have your son executed if you don't join a battle. And he responded, got other sons. Who does that remind you of, right? It's very Walder Frey-ish.
Totally.
It's also, but finally, what happens, and I think this is key to some other thoughts we have here, is that Richard. There's details of the battle, like how they split up into 3 sections, and one side was outnumbered, and the shape of the field and stuff. But Richard identified Henry on the field and decided to just go for him. He charged with his cavalry and thought if he could just take Henry out, he might just end the whole battle. Which I wonder if that's part of what Rhaegar was doing.
I believe there's a very good chance you're right about that. They had already been focusing on Robert prior to that battle, so it makes sense that they would continue with that strategy.
Yeah. Anyway, when he does this, that's when Stanley finally comes in and helps Henry. He comes in because Richard's been separated from the rest of his forces. He realizes, like, I can decide this battle at this moment.
It's like, oh, he's trying to decide this battle. I can decide this battle because he's trying to. Yeah, it's like. Yeah.
But anyway, also like Tywin, kind of waiting till he knows for sure how things are going to go, and then swooping in to look like, you know,
to make it
a decisive victor there. But
to make it very clear what side he's on. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So anyway, I'm sure that those parallels. I'm sure that's in George's mind. Another character that was in this battle is a guy named Brackenberry,
nice,
which I'm sure that name has got to be an inspiration for George. And there's all sorts of other stuff tied to that. This guy was okay. So if we go back a little bit in history, the thing that led Richard to, it's kind of convoluted, and we'll probably get details wrong, but part of what led Richard to being on the throne at this moment was two young boys who were in line for the throne were, I don't know, disqualified. Okay. And those boys, as far as history knows, disappeared. There's no real solid answer what happened to them, but they were in a castle that Brackenberry was in charge of, and then they went missing. Yeah. And so this reminds me of Bran and Rickon, like that some people believe that they were killed.
Or Aegon and
maybe Brackenberry was behind that.
Although we know what happened, but still, there were two of them.
Right? Yeah. There's all kinds of like pairs of potential princes that were. Someone might be responsible for having killed in one way or the other. Anyway, this is a story called "The Princess in the Tower." Right. That there's all sorts
which George is also borrowed for the Princess in the Tower. Yes.
Yeah. Again, so millions of parallels coming from that.
That's awesome.
One last little bit that Nina also brought up later on is that supposedly, and I also wonder maybe if this could be the case for Robert, is that Henry was crowned right there on the field. That Richard's crown was found. And
just put it right on
given to Henry right then and there. So maybe that's why there's no thought or memory of some ceremony later. And why
they wouldn't have had a crown there because Aerys would have still been wearing the crown or whatever, and they would have made a new one.
I guess that's a good point. Yeah,
you're right though. It may have been made official, like, all right, he's now the king. He'd already made his claim. So with that, while Aerys is still alive, I guess they probably can't say he's king yet. But it had become almost a foregone conclusion, especially when Tywin jumped in.
And it seems like there would be some big pomp and circumstance ceremony as a default, but I could see Robert being like, nah, I'm not doing all that.
Yeah.
Let's just have a tournament instead.
I might want to fight it. Yeah. Now that's, speaking of jokes like that, Aerys and Rhaegar and the council and everybody didn't take Robert's rebellion very seriously at first. After all, Rhaegar was hanging out at the Tower of Joy. That's not exactly where you go when you think there's a serious rebellion happening. And the Kingsguard weren't sent out to do anything about it. They held back at King's Landing, or some of them were with Rhaegar. Sure, Aerys had gone way too far with how he treated Brandon and Rickard, but it could be resolved, right? It didn't have to come to war. Well, apparently not. Ned famously evaded capture, returned to the north. We see quite a few versions of this story. They were very ready to support him, though, when he got home. I mean, the North stands for its murdered lords, and they killed the Lord and his heir. That's a really big deal. Brandon was probably kind of popular. Lord Rickard was, I don't know how popular he was, but he was the Stark in Winterfell. There's nothing to indicate he was some sort of villain to the rest of the North, so they probably did what you would expect them to do, which is get ready to fight. Robert made it back to the Stormlands and started sorting things out down there, kicking butt, and Jon Arryn was settling things in the Vale, because in none of these regions, except maybe the North, was it, yeah, we're all for you. There was definitely holdouts. There were loyalists, people who stayed true to the Targaryens in all these regions, again, except for the North, apparently. The Riverlands, yes, same thing. Not everyone was with the Tullys. The Tullys themselves had a long, unbroken streak of backing the Targaryens, dating back to Aegon the Conqueror, because he's the one who put them in charge. And so they had stayed loyal to that for a long time until this. Aerys replaced his hand, Owen Merryweather, on the grounds of allowing all this to happen. He let it get out of hand. He's like, you were too slow to do anything about it. Aerys started getting paranoid, like maybe this guy's involved.
He should have replaced himself for allowing all this to happen.
now that's the right move right there, Sean. You got it. Now remember, Owen Merryweather is the grandfather of Orton Merryweather, who is the one who is married to Taena Merryweather, who is, intriguing with / against Cersei there quite a bit in the latter stages of the books, and it's good stuff, but also not very related to this. So then Aerys appointed John Connington, who he saw as kind of a counter to Robert. He's like, you've got a Stormlord who's young and energetic and a great warrior. I've got a Stormlord who's young and energetic and a great warrior, and mine has red hair. Well, that didn't help. It was an interesting play, but it didn't work. Connington was a little too concerned with being a hero. He wanted to kill Robert himself. Sounds familiar. It sounds like something you just mentioned, Sean. He wasn't concerned with killing Robert so much as doing it himself, which is something he laments later. Something that, what's his name? Blackheart Toyne disabuses him of his false memories. Like, no, you really did screw that up. Tywin would have just burned the town, and that would have been that. And the reason it was a big mistake was Connington was in a hurry. He was trying to stop all these various factions from linking up into one big army. That would have been a huge disaster. In fact, it was a huge disaster because those armies did link up. Connington was unable to prevent that, and that led to the Battle of the Trident. So the Battle of the Bells, of all the skirmishes and battles and other things that happened prior, is, at least from John Connington's perspective, arguably even from a mainline perspective, it's wouldn't have happened if things had gone differently. And here's his memory of exactly that.
17 years had come and gone since the Battle of the Bells, yet the sound of bells ringing still tied a knot in his guts. Others might claim that the realm was lost when Prince Rhaegar fell to Robert's warhammer on the Trident, but the Battle of the Trident would never have been fought if the Griffin had only slain the stag there in Stony Sept. The bells told for all of us that day. For Aerys and his queen, for Elia of Dorne and her little daughter, for every true man and honest woman in the Seven Kingdoms, and for my Silver Prince.
And of course, he was fired and exiled. It's a little bit melodramatic, obviously, but he's absolutely right that a massive number of things hinged on the result of the Battle of the Trident, and he was one of the few people that could have stopped the Battle of the Trident from happening in the first place. It's not something he can really blame on other people that much. It's really just a few things. Only a few people had the power to change what happened there. Then it all comes back around, of course, for him with Varys and young Griff and the plot there. But again, a bit outside of the scope of today. But it is another thing that was created because of this very specific way the Battle of the Trident went. Meanwhile, after the Battle of the Bells, is while Connington's getting exiled, Jon Arryn marries Lysa Tully, and Eddard Stark marries Catelyn Tully. And boom, that alliance is locked in and ready to go. By the time Rhaegar was marching to fight at the Battle of the Trident, he had already condemned the Targaryens as the ruling dynasty of Westeros, Nina writes. And why is that? Well, it's because this war began with tyranny. Aerys, his execution of Brandon and Rickard, there's just no justification for that. It was not the act of a just king, of a sane king. It violates a number of traditions and laws, as well as just pisses people off. And then he didn't stop there, right? He demanded the heads of Ned and Robert, which is like, wait, why? What did they do? So there was no real settlement to be made. This is obviously an irrational thing, and you can understand why people would rebel against that. But Rhaegar, rather than saying, look, my dad screwed up, he shouldn't have done that, he's like, nope, we're going to march, we're going to defeat you. You rose up against us, we're going to defeat you. There's no, your rebellion was just. We're going to negotiate. There didn't seem to have been any attempts there to talk. Maybe there were. Maybe they were already past that point. Maybe it was just not feasible. Maybe we don't hear about that. But Rhaegar's basically, by getting an army together and choosing to fight Robert, he's basically saying, no, what we did was right. You got to live with it. And that's not going to sit well with a lot of people, is it, Sean?
It's not, but I don't know if the flip side would sit well either. I don't know if this is totally a bad play on Rhaegar's part. He might still have had some intention to negotiate, but he can do it better with one victory under his belt, right? If he can, might get more support of his own people behind this negotiation. He might have more leverage against Robert or whoever in a negotiation if he can win one key battle. He also might have been somewhat ill-informed on everything that had happened and had pressures of lords around him. I'm not saying he was absolutely justified in immediately riding off to battle. Like, if he had gone and killed his own dad, maybe that would have been more justifiable. But would he now be a hero and everyone would accept him as king if he killed his own dad, Kingslayer? And what is he supposed to do? It seems like this is the default correct thing to do, and other things that maybe he could have, should have done, he still could potentially do after this if he hadn't been killed. Like if he had won this battle, he might have been able to do all the things we wish he had done.
That makes a lot of sense. And I my next point here is comes from a similar angle, which is that after winning the Battle of the Bells, they were in a position to negotiate. They're like, look, we're serious, and that's what made the loyalists take them more seriously. Was, oh wow, they won a big battle here, and now they've done these marriages and have a big army. Okay, let's talk. But it went straight to let's kill Robert as quickly as we can. It appears to be like Rhaegar gets an army together as quickly as possible and then goes right for Robert. Maybe it's more complicated than that, but that seems to be a pattern we're identifying, is that just getting rid of Robert was really just that was their way to cut the head off the snake, and this whole thing goes away. And they were more focused on that than maybe the justice of Robert's cause or why people were upset or other things Aerys had done. Because obviously Aerys' injustices were nothing new. This was a peak of his injustices, but he had burned people to death before and done all sorts of other awful things. This was just maybe the culmination.
And to be fair, it's not like if they kill Robert, the whole thing goes away. Because Ned and his allies are still upset about what happened to but
they no longer
if they tell Ned, hey, we messed up, we're removing Aerys from the throne, I'm in charge now, I'll make you hand, I wonder if, especially if you consider like prophecy type stuff, if Rhaegar would have even been like, look, the North can be its own kingdom. We'll give you your name. There's all kinds of plays that he potentially could have made that would have ended this war, but we didn't get a chance for any of that to happen.
Bottom line, I guess you could say, is that it didn't have to come down to another battle, or had Robert and Rhaegar both survived that battle, that may have been, they maybe could have stopped after that and said, okay, look, we're both strong. Let's not just slaughter each other. We can see where this is going. We're too equally matched, etc. So Robert's claim was announced sometime after the Battle of the Bells. We don't know when it was made official, but it was probably kind of obvious before that. We already know Connington was trying to specifically kill Robert before Robert even announced a claim. So it was kind of obvious. For one thing, Robert was such a charismatic leader. For another thing, he's a cousin to the Targaryens. So the writing on the wall was there. If anyone was going to be king out of this group of rebels, it was very clearly him. It didn't take his claim to make that known. The claim just made it official, I suppose. But he didn't realize how much he'd hate the job after. He was thinking about, like, maybe they're going to make me king before it was official. At some point, it just came up. It realized it through the way people were talking, or like, it just became obvious. And I wonder when that moment was for him personally. Like, you know what? They're going to make me king, aren't they? Or I'm going to be king, aren't I?
It reminds me a little bit of George Washington, too, that he, was probably the most clearly identifiable leader after the War for Independence. But we didn't even have a constitution yet. It was like years later before we had an election for president. And at the Constitutional Convention, George Washington wore his full military regalia every single day. He wanted to make sure everyone remembered that he was the leader. It wasn't. I don't know if it would have been a given that he would win if he wasn't at least passively campaigning for it.
Yeah. So Nina points out that there is a lot that points to Robert that just makes it clear. It's not just obvious. It's obvious for specific reasons. Not just he was wronged by what happened to Lyanna personally, although obviously Lyanna and the Starks were wronged as well, arguably more so, but clearly he was wronged as well. And there's also just his first notable act of bravery when Gulltown didn't rise for Jon Arryn when he called the banners. He attacked Gulltown to keep them loyal and to bring them back into the fold. And Robert was the first one over the walls, and he killed Mark Grafton personally. So it's like, whoa, this guy's for real. So Nina says that quite possibly was the first moment where Robert really started to shine, and it was from a very early point, and then he just continued to shine and rise and rise and rise from then on until it was just kind of obvious at some point, like, yep, that must be, this is the guy. But even without that, even without Robert's perspective, or even without the king stuff, the battle's huge. I mean, there's still the revenge. There's still, you stole my fiance. There's still, you killed my friend's father and brother. Like, all that is still burning in him, even if you take away the other stuff. So gathering the armies. This is an important step. After the Battle of the Bells, of course, they couldn't just rush to King's Landing. They had to do those marriages, have the ceremony. Even if they were rushed, they had to, it still has to be made official. Then the troops have to be gathered. They have to get their food together and decide where they're going to go. Meanwhile, the Targaryens are doing the same thing. They're like, oh, we better take this seriously. Let's get the troops together. Send people out to various regions to gather. Prince Lewin Martell of Dorne, who was in the Kingsguard, was sent to Dorne to bring Dornishmen. Jaime notes that Aerys reminded Lewin Martell gracelessly that he held Elia and sent him to take command of the 10,000 Dornishmen coming up the King's Road. So Aerys was still like racist towards the Dornishmen and treating his grandchildren and his daughter-in-law terribly and antagonizing them. He just kind of like the way he antagonized Tywin when he really shouldn't have. He just thinking that the throne would protect him, or I don't know. It's a weird thing for a paranoid guy to do, but he's also not all there. So his actions don't have to make sense. That's the mind of a partly insane or fully insane person. Doesn't have to be rational. In fact, it's distinctly not rational. And so he's kind of using Elia as a hostage here. And Sean, we talked at length about how morale is really important in battle. What's the level of morale you would expect from these Dornish soldiers under a circumstance like this, where the king is demanding this and has treated the Elia badly in the past and made these racist comments? Like, how good you think their morale is here?
Less Al.
Less Al. Nice. They have less Al, not more. Yeah.
Shay's answer is better than mine.
Yeah, you're not going to top that one, Sean. Okay, I should have just asked her. Apparently, clearly, what do we need you for? No, just kidding. Yeah, that pretty much nails it, though. Yeah, like they would not be at their best, whereas the rebels. Just cause, like they killed his brother, like that's so like easy to get behind, Yeah.
My one of my thoughts is that probably the average soldier wasn't aware of that. Like, if the leaders were good leaders, they wouldn't tell everyone that, right? They're not all like watching the news and checking their phones to see what the king says, right? They would only know from what the leadership tells them, and good leaders wouldn't tell them that in the first place. But the leaders wouldn't have good morale given that. And the soldiers, whatever they think about the king, aren't going to have the best morale after marching hundreds of miles away from their country to some other, they're leaving their families and their farms behind to go fight for some other king that, even if they don't know these specific details, it's kind of new for them to be relatively, they have this more pride in Dorne than in Westeros. And yeah, morale wouldn't have been that high in the first place, I don't think so.
And even with that, Aerys was still not very trusting of them. He still, gives them they're not sending their best attitude of these Dornishmen coming into his country, even though it's part of his country already. He's this Aerys, There's no accounting for this guy, really. So, but Connington's forces weren't entirely destroyed. There was men here and there, and it seems like John Derry and Barristan Selmy were likely in charge of getting that back together. Because there's really only all the other Kingsguard are accounted for, and someone went and did this. We know that 3 of the Kingsguard were at the Tower of Joy, and one was Jaime Lannister, who never left because Aerys kept him by his side for the same reason that he kept Elia by his side. It didn't work in either case, really, but it's what he thought would work. So Nina says it might have been unconscious good luck for the crown at this stage that its 2 remaining Kingsguard members were both Riverlander and Stormlander, respectively, John Derry, Barristan Selmy. So that was a feather in their cap for not all the loyalty going in one direction towards Robert or Hoster Tully, respectively. There's definitely a lot of oomph behind those 2 houses, and some people might choose to be loyal, especially if Barristan Selmy is staying loyal, then, I'm staying loyal, etc. Things like that. There's proud, noble figures to stand behind, even if Aerys isn't a good one, a good example. They're still like, well, yes, it's now, Aerys maybe isn't a great king, but the last thing we need is a change at the top. Like, the Targaryens, just keep it the same. We don't need to have a new leader that who knows what that'll be, People could look ahead to Rhaegar and be like, Aerys, once he's dead, Rhaegar will be in charge. It'll be fine. We just got to get through this. So Robert's doing his thing in the Stormlands. Meanwhile, Rhaegar takes command of the new Crownlands levies. They're actually levying new men to fight this battle. And here is a quote that kind of refers to what you were talking about earlier, Sean, about how maybe things could have gone a little differently.
Rhaegar had put his hand on Jaime's shoulder. When this battle's done, I mean to call a council. Changes will be made. I meant to do it long ago, but, well, it does no good to speak of roads not taken. We shall talk when I return." Those were the last words Rhaegar Targaryen ever spoke to him. Outside the gates, an army had assembled, whilst another descended on the Trident. So the Prince of Dragonstone mounted up and donned his tall black helm and rode forth to his doom. He was more right than he knew. When the battle was done, there were changes made.
Oh, yeah. And Jaime was part of them.
You know, it never clicked in my mind till just now. That quote, he doesn't say when the war is done. He says when the battle is done.
Good point. You're right.
He wasn't even going to wait for the war to, whatever it was he planned. But I'm guessing at least part of it was removing Aerys from the throne.
Yeah, some sort of let's make him abdicate. Yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah.
I mean, there's all the evidence that Rhaegar was already planning this with Tywin and with other things. And yeah, I mean, that's a whole nother story. But yes, there is evidence that the too little too late thing, or the roads not traveled thing, was referring to that. It's like, yeah, I was but I was busy at the Tower of Joy, and all this other stuff. Yeah.
I can imagine it's a tough decision to make for a son to remove his king from power, and it might be controversial. Mm-hmm. And as a default, the Kingsguard might not allow it. However, I think the Kingsguard would have allowed it. I think that they would understand, like, we're protecting the throne, the realm. Like, this man Aerys is not necessarily. None of them liked what they were responsible, right?
Yeah.
Selmy does not like that he stands there and watches Aerys burn people to death. I don't think Rhaegar would have had to try to. Jaime freaking killed him himself. Like, he doesn't.
You're right. Yeah.
Like, maybe 2 or 3 of the Kingsguard descent, and maybe there's a battle and 2 or 3 people die. But I think at the end, one way or the other, Aerys is off the throne.
Yeah, I mean, he at least had those 3 with him.
Yeah, I don't think it would come to a battle either, because I don't think Rhaegar would have been pushing for his father to be killed. He would have been,
right? Yeah,
just put him in a little castle somewhere and put some guards on him and all that, and that's dangerous because someone could weaponize.
Let him keep issuing commands and just act like you're fulfilling them.
Aerys might not even be aware that he's been removed. They just walk him off into some chamber.
Put him on a styrofoam iron throne.
Yeah.
He says, it's like the throne feels softer today. This is nice. Yeah. Just let him think he's still in charge. Yeah, that's funny. So yeah, it was too little too late, though, as Rhaegar says. Yeah, it does no good to speak of roads don't take it. Exactly. Yeah, it's too late at that point.
Unless you like fan fiction, I
suppose.
And alternate universes.
Then your opportunities are endless. So let's talk about who the combatants were. On the rebel side, we've got Ned Stark, we got Robert Baratheon, we got Jon Arryn, we got Hoster Tully, Roose Bolton, Wyman Manderly, Crowfoot Umber and his 2 sons, Sir Bartimus of the Wolf's-Den, the one-legged knight. Apparently he saves Manderly's life during this battle, according to him. But that's why he got the Wolf's-Den. So, he's got some evidence to back that up. Like, what did he do to deserve that? Well, according to him, it was save his lord's life. Rickard Karstark was there. We don't know if he was a lord yet, but he was there. He may have been fighting alongside his father, or if he was already the lord, then he would have been leading the Karstark forces himself. This is something he refers to when he's about to get executed. He's like, I fought beside your father, etc. Roose Bolton. I already said Roose Bolton. Jorah Mormont would have been there. More on that later. He would have been the lord because his father probably already abdicated, speaking of abdicating, and took the black. But he hadn't been knighted yet, interestingly. He got knighted after the Greyjoy Rebellion, so that's another 7 years later. So Jorah probably didn't do a whole lot in this battle, at least not enough to get knighted. But Northerners don't get knighted a lot anyway, so. Also, Lyn Corbray was there. This is the famous moment in which he got Lady Forlorn. His father was fighting and got wounded, and Lyn scoops up the family Valyrian steel blade and goes on and does great stuff with it. In fact, he's the one that kills Prince Lewin Martell. Although apparently Lewin Martell was injured prior to that.
I don't know if I call it great stuff.
He gets to claim, yeah, you're right, yeah, kind of terrible, yeah. But at least he was on the right side. He was on the good guy side. Lyn Corbray is a pretty bad dude, but at least he fought on the correct side, in my opinion. Maybe not the correct side. The side that's going to end the world, right? Maybe not the correct side.
Yeah, I have mixed opinions on whether I think one side was truly the most righteous.
Yeah. From their perspective, it seemed awfully righteous, but with other details, it's like, well, I don't know. So Lionel Corbray, who was the elder and who was still mad that he didn't get the sword because he did inherit the rest, may have been there too, but maybe not because that's why he didn't get the sword. I don't know. Jason Mallister was there, another badass from the Riverlands. So there's a lot. There's plenty of other lords that we could name that were probably there, but it would probably get a little old going through every single one of these and trying to figure out who was there or not and guessing whether they were what age they were or not. But there were a lot of lords there. But a lot of them.
We did say if we finish this podcast, so
that's right. But keep in mind, a lot of them may not have done much. Like Jorah, he may not have done much. That the way the battle played out, Robert kills Rhaegar, and maybe a lot of the guys may not have ever drawn their sword or swung it at anyone. It may have been over relatively quickly. That's yet another detail we're not entirely clear on, even how quick the battle went. So even having been there, they may not have done much. Some of them certainly did, but others, not so much.
Worth noting, it might not have been super quick, but I don't think it could have been too long because that would have been mentioned. If it was like a 4-day battle
That's
and they,
true.
every morning when the sun came up, it resumed, that would be part of the stories, and it's not.
It would be hard to forget that. Yeah, like on the 4th day, Robert. Yeah, it would have been. I think you're right about that. On the loyalist side, so the rebels had fewer men total, but their men had been fighting battles throughout the war, whereas the loyalist army here, most of the soldiers had not fought in a battle yet, or if they had, it was some other battle long before. It wasn't in this war. The 10,000 Dornishmen hadn't fought in anything yet. The Crownlanders, who the combined force that fought at the Battle of the Bells, the survivors from that battle did. But like the Crownlands levies, complete rookies, a lot of them, probably some of them had maybe never, like think of the guys Dunk was training in the Sworn Sword. And some of them might be like at that level and had 2 weeks of training at most.
Something to distinguish that. There is another factor, like having experience and training too are big factors, but not having it doesn't mean you can't win. Imagine if those guys that Dunk was trying to train were passionate about the cause.
Yeah, they weren't.
That's another factor.
Good point.
Good
point.
One of the first battles in a Revolutionary War, the Battle of Bunker Hill, it was just a bunch of farmers. It was just a bunch of American farmers who'd never been in any battle against trained and experienced redcoats. And the British ended up winning that battle, but they got them to retreat 2 times. Like 2 times, the British charged and the Americans fought them off. They charged again and fought them off. And finally, the 3rd time, they took the hill or whatever.
Yeah.
But point is that rookie, inexperienced farmers with their spears and rakes or whatever, they can win if they really believe in the cause.
And I think that they're more likely to have really believed in the cause on the rebel side, because without the magic stuff, which the farmers don't know about that. Like, heck, Robert and Ned didn't know about that stuff.
Yeah.
Why would the peasant farmers on one side or the other? Rhaegar's folk wouldn't know that either. So the 10,000 Dornishmen, led up by insults and threats, their morale, they're not in it like they don't meet this description, but maybe some of them did, but certainly some on the rebel side did, I would think. So the rebels probably had more of that fire.
You gotta think every Stark soldier is passionate about this, right?
He burned our lord to death and strangled our son. I mean, that's gonna fire you up in this context, this setting. Yeah, they're mad, big mad, and justifiable. You can understand it. So Gulltown was maybe brought back into the fold under the Arryns. They might not have been too excited about their place in the battle, considering what they were forced to switch sides. We find out at some point during Arya's traipsing around the Riverlands, or perhaps I think it's Arya's traipsing around the Riverlands with the Brotherhood Without Banners, where there's some ruined villages, and it's revealed that Hoster Tully had come down on some of his own people because they stayed loyal to the king, and he had to go attack them. And that, to this day, that causes some issues. Of course, to this day is only 15, 16 years later, so you can understand why a village being burned down, it hasn't been the same since, even if it was rebuilt, partly. So other houses like Mooton, that's Maidenpool, that's a Riverlands house, but they stayed loyal. Rhaegar's squire at one point was Sir Miles Mooton, and he was killed at the Battle of the Bells, so they had good incentive to stay on the Targaryen side. House Rhaegar and Goodbrook were 2 of the examples of houses that Hoster Tully went to war with in his own realm. Darys, of course. John Darys, one of the Kingsguard, so that's a Riverlands house. You can see why they stayed loyal. The Darys had the Targaryen tapestries still hanged, even in the time of Robert. The Wentz is a big question for me. That's the house that, excuse me, that ruled Harrenhal at the time. I don't know what side they took, but there's evidence that the Wentz were backing Rhaegar to that they were behind the Tournament of Harrenhal, that they were the proxy for holding the Tournament of Harrenhal, which would very clearly put them on the side of the Loyalists, especially given one of Rhaegar's 3 most trusted Kingsguard was Oswell Went. So, yeah, that seems like a safe bet. Also, you have the survivors of the Battle of Bells, like I said. A bunch of Crackclaw Point houses, which are in the Crownlands, fought for the Targaryens. Brienne hears this when she's in that area. Boggs, Brune, Crab, houses like that. And a very large host of Reachmen. This is perhaps the most important part of the army because it is more of a standard knightly army that is pretty loyal to the Targaryens. You got a story of Randall Tarley sending the head of, I forget which lord, some Stormlands house, Catherine, I think it was, to Aerys after winning a small battle there that Mace Tyrell took credit for. So, yeah. And of course, who's missing? There's no Lannisters, no Freys. Much of the Stormlands is out of it because they had fought each other and were depleted.
I wanted to bring up, multiple people in the chat brought up the idea that, if Catelyn's mother's a Went, Minissa Went, maybe that makes it question mark for Went, but that would point to them siding with the Tullys.
That is a good point. Yeah, that is a tricky one. And
it makes it more likely with the kinship that they would have, but I don't know.
And also just the proximity would be tricky for them too. I mean, Harrenhal is one of the closest houses to where the battle was fought.
Yeah.
One of the closest castles. So it wouldn't be one of those where they could be like, let's just stay neutral. I mean, maybe they did because they didn't have much help to send at this point, but probably they did. I'm guessing because of the Rhaegar stuff, they were more likely siding with him. But you're right. There may not have been a full-throated defense. There may have been a 1 foot in each camp kind of situation.
And we pointed out in the beginning that there wasn't clear unity among maybe anywhere except the North, right? So
yeah, that's true. There
might have been people in the Riverlands on both sides.
Yeah. There was also...
Or from Harrenhal or the Wents even. I don't know how many family members into Wents, but I can imagine at least some of their bannermen being split on different sides.
Yeah, you're right. This is like, think of the Blackfire rebellions where your neighbor might be on the other side of you, of the battle as you, whereas that would rarely be the case in other contexts. But here, and then another big part of the Reach army was not there, though. As much as there was a large contingent of Reachmen there, the other really large contingent was besieging Storm's End, where Stannis was held up. This is where the Onion Knight incident occurred. So those troops maybe could have been put to better use up at the Trident, but that's not what happened. The Ironborn.
I don't think you named the Ironborn.
Oh, yeah. The Ironborn, of course, took no part, at least at this part. They did jump in at the end, which we'll mention also at the end, if we time permitting, but they played no role at this stage.
I wouldn't have wanted the Ironborn on my side.
Yeah. I mean, well, I wouldn't have wanted them on the other people's side either, though. If it's neutral, that's good, but like better them on our side than on their side.
I don't know. An excuse to take some of them out.
So if Rhaegar had won, just a quick question. We're not going to answer this question. I just want to throw it out there for y'all, maybe to discuss in the chat or just consider on your own. If what would have happened to the wildfire caches? Now, Aerys set them before the Battle of the Trident. He set them after the Battle of the Bells. So it's one thing if he had just set them right after his son was killed. He's like, oh, time to set the wildfire, But he had already done that, which is a little surprising. But it shows his level of he's a very prepared paranoid man. So I guess would Rhaegar just have had them removed, or Aerys have had them just like, okay, so Robert's dead, so we can take these caches back out now, or is Aerys just going to leave them there? He's like, I might leave them there in case I need them for something else, in case I need to detonate the city for some other reason. Oof. Would Jaime have told someone? Would Jaime be like, hey, Rhaegar, dude, your dad's got wildfire stashed all over the city? You might want to
That's what I think would have happened. I think Jaime would have told someone.
Yeah, it might have then proceeded.
Rhaegar would have dealt with it.
It would have maybe proceeded to the forced abdication from that stage, but that may have been his cue to light the wildfires. Like, you want me to step down? I'll show you. Yeah. So, yeah.
Yeah, Jaime might have still killed Aerys.
Let's see. You have some notes from the chat, Sean, you wanted to refer to?
Yes, Terra Incognito, who is a regular in the chat, revealed that she is not Incognita. Good, thank you. Revealed that she has not read Duncan Egg, the Duncan Egg series. Oh my God, what are you waiting for? Please do it. You'll love it so much, I promise you. I think if I had to choose George finishing Song of Ice and Fire or Dunk and Egg. I think I might choose Dunk and Egg. It might be blasphemous sounding to some people, but
Tara just got one of the shirts from our Threadless shop.
Yeah.
In the mail. A bunch of people in the chat have gotten their shirts that they won from our Trial by Theory episode. So yeah.
Cool. Hope those were working out well for you folks.
And on that Trial by Theory episode, we were talking about the idea of working and how powerful we have to be. Could people do it from a distance? We're thinking about whether or not Rob could have gone into Shaggy Dog or something like that. And we just neglected to mention that Arya worked into Nymeria from far away.
From overseas.
Like she was on a different continent.
Right.
Yeah.
That's a great point. Very good point.
So it's at least a potential. And Arya isn't some master wizard. So if she could do it, maybe Rob could do it. I don't know.
Dornish James says, in the Riverlands, what has me curious is whether the Blackwoods sided with Robert or Aerys. I think if they were pro-Targaryen, the Brackens would bring it up constantly. But Aerys was Betha Blackwood's grandson. Yeah, that is a tough one. Yeah, we don't know. I wonder if that's the kind of question, if you ask George, he would probably he probably would defer or demur and not give a straight answer. But he might have it in his mind. That is a good point. I'm not really sure. Maybe they just sat out. It's a really good it's a poser. I don't know how to
How
answer
old
that
would their
one.
lord have been? Is it possible they had like a boy lord right then, and it was easier for them? You know what I mean?
I don't recall if
Sometimes, if you have a child lord, then
Tytos Blackwood. I mean, Tytos Blackwood's old enough to have been Lord then. He's
Yeah.
gray-haired, but doesn't mean his father wasn't alive.
okay, yeah.
So, there's maybe something he says
Or there
that
could be
can
like
hint at
it
it.
could be the same thing where you have like an aged lord, like an old lord. So that's the same thing. Like if you have a boy child lord or like a dying lord, like sometimes you don't get involved or you have an out to not get involved.
Yeah. It seems likely the Brackens and Blackwoods fought in the war, and they probably followed their liege lord. I mean, I'm guessing that might be why no one brings it up, because they both fought for the same side.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
One of those times where neither of them can
Yeah.
hold it over the other because they both were on the same side.
Yeah, it'll be pot calling a kettle black,
Yeah,
whatever.
yeah.
Yeah, that's a good
Pot
explanation.
calling the kettle Blackwood.
Yeah. That's what happens if the Blackwoods and Kettle Blacks ever marry. You've got House Kettle Blackwood. Okay, Zanel's Sunchaser says, any Ice and Fire Con survival tips going to my first one this year?
Hey, hopefully you get there on Thursday because they have a Thursday night Skelly party, which isn't that advertised, but it's a fun thing. Any thoughts from you, Sean?
I have 3 tips.
Oh.
One is, it could be windy and 40, or it could be 78. You be prepared, especially for the tournament, which is outdoors.
Yeah.
You
Look
know,
at
be
your
prepared
weather.
for a swing of weather.
Yeah, look at your weather a few days before your trip to prepare, but also be aware that the forecast might change drastically, even those few days.
What's number 2?
Yeah, what's the other?
Another tip I would give is, and this might be easier said than done for some people, but just be friendly. I'm telling you, everyone there is there to meet new people and to hang out and tell stories. Just don't be afraid to meet
You'll
people.
be amongst
and say hi
your
to
people.
everyone or whatever.
Yeah, this is
Yeah.
You may never,
Yeah.
you may not have experienced something like that before, being around people who are deeply into A Song of Ice and Fire. But it really is something else in a good way, a very, very, very good way. It's
What's
very
3 then,
fulfilling.
Sean? Dying to
And
know.
3 is that the location is about an hour away from the airport and pretty much everything else. So it's worth making a grocery stop, getting, I don't know, drinks or snacks or something like that. Because once you're at the lodge, it's hard to leave it and go anywhere to get anything else.
Yeah.
There's not a lot in the way of like restaurants or convenience stores or
It's
whatever
a
else,
state
you know.
park, to be clear.
Yeah.
The convention is at Deer Creek State Park, so that's part of why it's, there's extra room to do stuff. But yeah, like you said, Sean, I was going to say that one. If you didn't say that, I was going to, yes, make sure you have some
Yeah.
snacks. There's a fridge in your room,
Yeah.
so you can easily have it.
It's a beautiful location, but there's not like a city nearby.
I like to have just like some milk and cereal or some granola bars, some fruit. Yeah, just basic stuff. Yeah.
My other thing is I'm putting the panel schedule in the chat, which is almost full. There's a few things not quite on that schedule. Like there will be a History of Westeros meetup. It's just not on there yet. But you can look at the panel schedule there. And I suggest going to the Icebreakers event. I think it's a great way to meet people. They do different games where you do the thing where you put a character name on your forehead and you have to guess who you are, like little icebreaker game. It's just fun little way. They have a couple of them on the schedule, I think, too.
And you will not be the only first timer there.
Yeah.
Let's put it that way. There was plenty of first timers there, probably a couple dozen at least.
Yeah. And we will be doing Quiplash again this year. 2 different sessions of Quiplash, including Sunday night. And I'm working on a House of the Dragon themed Quiplash pack. So that'll be a glorious good time, I hope.
Yeah, it's the 10th Ice and Fire Con, I believe, but it's the first one, obviously, with House of the Dragon themed stuff going on. So that's kind of a bit of a milestone, both a 10-year and a new content to be mixed in.
Yeah, I'm excited. Sean's doing his yoga again, the Song of Ice and Fire yoga, which he's done before, which I think is a pretty cool, unique event.
I was going to say, I think if you can fit your yoga mat in your bag, it might be easier said than done. But I think the first time we did it, my wife contributed some yoga mats to Tara, who runs the event. So they might have some yoga mats on hand there. But yeah, it's a lot of standard yoga stuff, but I just slightly altered the names. Like some of them are easy, like mountain pose, but Children of the Forest pose.
Mountain pose.
Mountain pose. You got to be really big.
Water dancer pose.
Christina K asks, is any of it being streamed? No, but they record it. And on the Ice and FireCon YouTube channel, there will be pretty much all the panels, unless there's technical difficulties, are always released on their YouTube channel, which is pretty great. I don't think yoga will be recorded, though. Or Quiplash, actually. But the regular panels will be. Not streamed, but recorded and posted. And that is the last weekend of April. 2023, if you're listening in the future.
That's right. So a word from our sponsor, Smile Brilliant. I have been going through my teeth whitening, and we have been mentioning that I'm going to show pictures, and at last, here we are. We have pictures. I'm not excited to show pictures of my teeth, but I am excited for you all to see the difference. It's kind of a one of those things where no one likes to show up close and personal shots of themselves unless you're just like super beautiful or something, which I'm not. So
you are beautiful.
Oh, well, thank you. No.
But just regular beautiful, not super beautiful.
Not super beautiful. Yeah, thanks, Sean. I didn't say that, but I'm glad you pointed it out. I didn't call him super beautiful.
Good enough.
Just call him like I see him.
But no, you can see on the screen. I put the teeth up on the screen, and I think you can most clearly tell on the middle tooth.
Yeah, I have one tooth that's been crowded out on the bottom, and that gets a little shading and gets a little less attention than the others because it's back there, and that's how it works. You can tell that one's been colored up significantly.
See that.
Turns
I'm
out
switching it away now because I don't want to keep looking at the teeth for longer than I need to.
Turns out it's hard to take pictures of teeth, and the whiter they get, the more they reflect glare from colored things. And it's like, this is really hard to do. It took me a while. I was like, I'll take some pictures, and I was like, oh my god, I can't do this. It's so hard. Why do my teeth? Yeah, anyway, but they do look good. It really has made a difference. In person, you can tell even better. Like a lot of things, even with great quality screens, things in person look better, like great artwork. Yes, my teeth are a work of art. No, of course not. But you do get 20% off this process with the code Westeros at Smile Brilliant. Make your teeth whiter. I wanted to spread this out so you could see that even after 3 months have passed. I started this 3 months ago. I could have done it in a matter of like 2 or 3 weeks if I had been aggressive about it. But I wanted to space it out so that y'all could see that even with time passing, there was still progress. So it wasn't like a short-term solution. Now, obviously, you'll want to, it'd be better to see it like a year from now, but
I will say,
we can't really pull that off, probably.
Lord Avocado in the chat said, nice, mate. Your teeth are looking so white that I kind of want to name them to the Kingsguard. Good progress. I love that. Thanks, Lord Avocado.
That's hilarious. Okay. They're white walkers. White chompers. Yes. All right. Let's, once again, that's 20% off with code Westeros, smilebrilliant.com. They've been a great sponsor. So I hope you check them out and help your teeth.
Brilliant sponsor, you might say.
The Ruby Ford. Yes, if you get rubies on your teeth, you want to brush that off. But in yet another example of the memory of the Battle of the Trident, echoing throughout history in A Song of Ice and Fire, Arya and Micah go searching for Rhaegar's rubies, and Sansa won a Game of Thrones. 15-ish years before is when the armies actually clashed there. What became known as the Ruby Ford is not far from King's Landing. And what's interesting is, I don't know if it maybe didn't have a name at all before, or if the former name was forgotten, or if it just got a name for the first time because of this. It was the Sapphire Ford before, yeah. So under normal circumstances, I think the distance from Harrenhal to King's Landing is about 2 weeks, and this is a really similar location, generally speaking. So if they were rushing, which they probably were, cut it down a few days, maybe 9-10 days, something like that. We'll say it was pretty quick that they left King's Landing. When Jaime hears that last words he ever heard from Rhaegar Targaryen, it's probably only about 9 or so days before the battle happened. And as we probably extrapolated before, it was probably a one afternoon type of battle, not an all day, not a multi-day grind. So it's not clear if they were just trying to stop Robert from advancing on King's Landing, or just trying to kill Robert specifically, or just trying to win a battle and then negotiate from strength, right? A bunch of mysteries here, both in their goal, their decision-making, and behind all that is the motivations that we're uncertain of. We're a lot clearer on the motivations on the rebel side. And most of the loyalists are just defending the king that they swore to defend and the prince they just swore to. But Rhaegar's motivations, his timing, that's where there's a whole lot of wiggle room and confusion and mystery and room for theorizing. As well, we must assume that armies of this size sent head scouts. They generally knew where both sides were in the first place. So they're just like, how far away are they now? How far away are they now? So they probably both had a pretty good idea of where they were and where they were going to meet. So I suspect Robert and company specifically planted themselves where they were, knowing Rhaegar was coming. And we're like, okay, we're on this side of the ford. They're going to have to cross over the water to get to us. And apparently Rhaegar ordered the crossing straight away, almost perhaps right away, which is very curious. Robert's army was surely happy enough to claim the advantage. Like, we have the high ground. They're going to let us have the high ground. But why, right? Let's have a quote first.
Of the famous battle on the Trident, much has been written and said, but all know that the two armies clashed at the crossing that would ever after be called the Ruby Ford for the scattered rubies on Prince Rhaegar's armor. The opponents were well matched. Rhaegar's forces numbered some 40,000, a tenth part of which were anointed knights, while the rebels had somewhat fewer men, but those they possessed were tested in battle, while much of Rhaegar's force was raw and new.
Yeah, so the armies didn't really favor Rhaegar unless he was overconfident in their quantity, which he's not a dummy. I mean, he's not a big battle experienced guy, but this is still basic stuff, right? Was it his belief in destiny that he just didn't think he could lose? Or was he just regular old overconfident? Or some combination of both? What do you think, Sean? It's kind of an odd decision to just go straight, you know? What does this speak? What does this say to you?
It's possible that he knew he couldn't win either way. Like, maybe again, I don't know if that totally makes sense, but
you figured he was going to die no matter what?
Yeah, like maybe he had a vision. I don't know what could explain it. Like, a vision of Robert on a throne doesn't necessarily explain it. Although maybe he thought he could change destiny, or maybe he thought he needed to change destiny, but maybe he thought it was maybe he knew that his father wasn't going to be king anymore, and so he's going to be king, or maybe Robert will. Anyway, I might be getting a little ahead of myself because I think I had a note on this later, but I will say here now that I think there's at least a strong chance that he thought he could just end it if he were able to kill Robert and just went right for him.
Yeah.
And it maybe all the rest of the armies and the battles, weren't relevant, or he didn't care about, it'll handle it themselves, or I've got generals I can
Everybody
trust.
knew Robert led from the front by that point, probably, so maybe he was counting on that.
One other thing I think is interesting is that we don't know how many forces the rebels had.
We know it was just less. Yeah.
Right. But was it 10% less or half as many?
Yeah.
And that could add to it also if they did significantly outnumber them, right? Let's say that it was close to an even match, except they had 10,000 extra Dornish troops. Then Rhaegar might have been a little more reckless. He's like, we're going to win this anyway. Just charge. It might not be the most efficient. More people would die than they should. But that won't even matter if I can just kill Robert.
Yeah. Let me lay out,
especially if there was a moment when he saw him, this opportunity.
Go. Yeah, here's my chance.
Like, charge.
Maybe it wasn't his initial plan, but he took the initiative or something.
Their archers weren't ready. He could identify Robert on the battlefield and just said, "Go, quick, down, move. Let's just do it now."
Robert is very distinct on the battlefield. As hard as it is to see people on a battlefield, like there would be his banners nearby and his giant helm and his just giant self.
Quick little side note: Henry and Richard's battle at Bosworth. He got off his horse and just went in amongst the men. Like he was trying to keep himself from being identifiable.
Wow.
And he wasn't necessarily cowardly, but he just wasn't a soldier. He wasn't a warrior of any kind. He was like a financier and a student, and like he was like an intellectual. Richard was a soldier and battle-hardened warrior. And Richard like, there's Henry, let's go get him. And Henry's like, crap, get me off my horse.
I don't want to fight him.
Everyone get around me quick. Yeah. And Richard almost got right to him. Like we said earlier, he was within like an arm's reach of getting
crazy.
Yeah.
That's wild. So, and you wonder if there was anything like that going on, but we'll get to that in a minute with like Rhaegar's Kingsguard and maybe Robert's closest men. But so crossing, this is why let's lay out a little more why this decision to just charge or to advance across the river is a little curious. Crossing a river is hard, even when it's the ford. Maybe the ford was really shallow and they expected it to fill up and they're like, okay, this is the weather. Now's our best chance because of the situation of the water level. But if you're taking a situation where you have two knights of average ability, one of them standing on a riverbank and one of them's standing in the mud trying to climb out of the riverbank, it's pretty obvious who has the advantage here. Now take that and multiply it by 1,000 or whatever, however many knights are lined up on the bank waiting for the other guys to try and cross. It's also pretty clear if you think about who has the advantage with archers. The guys who are moving forward are going to take more arrow shots than the guys who are standing in a fixed position shooting at the ones who are approaching them. So the advancing warriors have to take more arrow fire. Now, recall Edmure stopping Tywin at the Battle of the Fords. Even though Robb didn't want him to, he did it really effectively, and Tywin had a lot more men than he did. But they were very staunch with their defense of the fords, found all the different spots that Tywin may try to cross. Tywin was looking for other places to cross, and Edmure really effectively defended those, and Catelyn watched it. Pretty similar, I think. Maybe there was a little bit of a pre-battle like this where Rhaegar was trying to find a way across, and Robert was effectively stopping them. So they're like, all right, well, we can't find a way across. We're just going to form our army into a fist and force a crossing. Or
maybe to give Rhaegar more credit, maybe this is the spot that Robert didn't have prepared well. Maybe that's why he chose this spot. The archers weren't ready. Maybe the banks were muddy on the far side and not the near side or something like that.
But why not take a defensive stance and force Robert to cross? Why not go elsewhere? Why be in a hurry at all? There are reasons. There are reasons for that. So let's try to answer that. One is, maybe he's just really concerned with killing Robert as quickly as possible to save as many lives as possible. That's maybe a unnecessarily friendly take on Rhaegar, but they didn't want Robert to get away either. Maybe Robert would withdraw, get more troops, and then he's a bigger army. That might have been a concern that if they don't take him out now, he's going to be harder to take out later. Perhaps Rhaegar perceived the messaging favored Robert. Like, this guy's the hero here. You're the villain. Maybe Rhaegar perceived that, the way people were talking. It's not hard to see the way his dad behaved that people might prefer the young, energetic, just hero here. Like, we don't want that word to spread. More and more people might join his side. But an even bigger open question is Tywin. Tywin was in the field with an army nearby-ish, just sitting there. So Rhaegar's like, if he thinks Tywin's on his side, he might advance, and then if Robert flees, he's got nowhere to go because Tywin's nearby. And if he sits there, maybe he's afraid Tywin joins Robert. I don't know what he was thinking, but there's no way Tywin's army wasn't part of the consideration of both sides, because both of them probably knew he was out there. He wouldn't have been that far away. And again, scouts and all that, they're looking for other armies, and they're going to be worried about some other army approaching from here or there. Or who knows who's on whose side at this point? There's definitely people that might switch sides or haven't declared yet, so they'd all have to be wary about things coming from other places, especially with, like, the Ironborn not taking a side yet. Like, maybe they would have taken a side at some point. You got to watch out for that. So, all these things. Maybe he's worried about what his dad will do back in King's Landing to Elia, to other people at King's Landing. Maybe he murders Jaime, or maybe Jaime murders him. He's worried about... Time was not on his side. There's a lot of arguments that show, okay, I can see why Rhaegar was in a hurry here. But maybe he was just eager to go back to pregnant Lyanna at the Tower of Joy. I mean, or again, some combination of all these three things, or all these many things, right? It's really hard to cipher through which is most important to Rhaegar, which other facts, because we're also probably missing some details too, right, Sean?
Yeah, lots of things that we sort of suspected are details that George could give us. Just someone present at the battle just needs one line of dialogue saying, "But storms were covering, and soon the ford would become uncrossable." Something like that would explain why he had or thought he needed to go right then. Or, again, I suggested a couple times that maybe just the archers weren't prepared, especially if Rhaegar was moving quicker than the scouts anticipated and suddenly was there. And Robert was like, "Oh crap, we don't have our defenses up yet." And Rhaegar's like, "Hey, they don't have their defenses up yet. All right, let's just go now." Even if there was an element of recklessness or uncertainty, there might have been just enough for him to, things he thought weren't going to go his way were going his way, and he just seized the moment,
So I agree with you. In general, I would say that we don't know what the specifics are, but it's probably not just just dumb. He had a reason or multiple reasons. It may have been the wrong calculus based on all the different factors, but I'm definitely not going to guess that he just was rash about it. But that is possible.
It's also the type of thing that, hindsight's 2020, and the victor gets to write the history. If Rhaegar had won, if Rhaegar had beat Robert,
what a hero! Dang.
Yeah, and it seems like it wasn't like Robert easily overpowered him. It seemed like a close match, and Robert pulled it out in the end. So it seems like if things went slightly differently, if someone got a little lucky or unlucky, or maybe the only reason Rhaegar lost was he got a little unlucky,
his horse's
hoof slipped or something like that. And if he had won, we'd be wondering, why did Robert stay back in a defensive position? Why didn't he cross the ford?
Yeah, very good point. Yeah, and with all that, with so many unknowns, it's something that I'm a little skeptical we'll hear a whole lot more about it. I'm not sure George needs to give us more detail about whatever happened at the Battle of the Trident, but he could, and there were a lot of witnesses, so it definitely could come up. There's plenty of opportunity for it. I don't know if he will. I don't know if he wants to. I don't know if he thinks it's important.
Well,
I can understand being skeptical of it, but we've gotten so much so consistently. I don't know. It's a good precedent set to give us
it
more.
hasn't stopped.
We have one thing that will probably give us more information. I don't know what the latest update is, but there's the stage musical about Robert's Rebellion that's in the works.
Very good point.
Whoa, I didn't know about this.
Yeah, and I don't know how. I assume that would have the Battle of the Trident, and George is involved in that. So I do think that we have a very strong likelihood of getting a lot more context for this. In musical form.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, because George is supposed to be involved in that directly.
I think he is writing the script for the musical, I believe.
That is really cool. So yeah, he's going to have to think about some of these things, maybe give us some answers. So that's really cool. Yeah, because if it came from someone else, we might not be sure it would be hard to be accepting it as canon. But if it comes from George, it's going to be hard to not count as canon.
Yeah.
I have another little thought on some details that I'll wait to bring up later, but I want to point out Dany had a vision of it too, and we could get more of Dany's vision.
I should be clear, actually. It's unclear the scope of the musical. It is about the tourney of Harrenhal. So it might end, it might really be a very self-contained thing. I had kind of assumed that it would go past it, but now that I think about it, I'm not actually. I think it's actually the tournament itself.
Okay, so we wouldn't see the Trident or anything. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I think I don't think we would.
It would still maybe.
It would give us context, though.
Yeah, not as much as we would have wanted, but a lot. It could potentially. So you brought up you were going to bring up one of the dreams, Sean.
I'll wait till later, but I'm just saying it is another potential source to gain insight if Dany has some vision.
You're totally right. Someone else could look back on it, Bran or Dan, or anyone really, especially Bran, but Dany is a strong candidate because she's already dreamt of it, as we'll see, as we'll get to. So there's all these takes, all these people who were there. There's some eyewitness takes. Most of them come from nobles. Here's a pretty precious one because it comes from someone who was not a high-ranking official, not a lordly lord, or a knight, yes, barely, but, on the border of being a hedge knight. It's elder brother from the Quiet Isle. Here's his quote.
When I died in the Battle of the Trident, I fought for Prince Rhaegar. Though he never knew my name, I could tell you why I saved the lord I served a lord who served a lord who had decided to support the dragon rather than the stag. Had he decided elsewise, I might have been on the other side of the river. The battle was a bloody thing. The singers would have us believe it was all Rhaegar and Robert struggling in a stream for a woman both of them claimed to love. But I assure you, other men were fighting too, and I was one. I took an arrow through the thigh and another through the foot, and my horse was killed from under me. Yet I fought on. I can still remember how desperate I was to find another horse, for I had no coin to buy one, and without a horse, I would no longer be at night. That was all I was thinking of, truth be told. I never saw the blow that felled me. I heard hooves behind me, and I heard hooves behind my back, and thought, "Oh, horse!" But before I could turn, something slammed into my head and knocked me back into the river where, by rights, I should have drowned.
So that's probably our best account from a non-noble. It's lengthy, it's weighty, it tells us a lot. It shows us what was on his mind. It shows us he wasn't loyal to either side, really. He just got dragged into this. It shows us that, yes, crossing the river was difficult. He took multiple arrow wounds, which is what we were saying. Crossing the river, that puts you at great peril. That's when the archers would be most at their most dangerous, and you're crossing into that. I would guess that there were a lot fewer arrow wounds on the side of the rebels because they were holding a fixed position on the one side of the river. So guys like this were wading into that. And it, as it says here, he was, I don't know what I was fighting for, a woman they claimed to love. Like, he doesn't even mention the throne here. He's not even talking about the crown. That's really important that this soldier, from a soldier's perspective, that's what he perceived this was about. Fighting over a woman. Fighting over love, which is like, why are 80,000-ish people fighting over that? I can understand that it's not that what he did was wrong or what she did was right, but this is a bit much for a spousal, domestic dispute kind of situation. From his perspective, it might seem like that. And it cost him everything. Now, he's happy with where he ended up. He's like, I found peace and God and all this other stuff, and that's great. But he feels lucky. He's like, I should have died. Like, most of the people I was with weren't as lucky as me. They did die. I was strong, and that helped me survive the wounds I had taken. Other people weren't so lucky or weren't so strong, and they didn't make it. And that's why he says, when I died at the Battle of the Trident, because it's kind of like he's born again. He was baptized in the water and brought out. This was kind of one of the clues for Sandor being alive, because he says the Hound is dead, but blah blah blah. It's like, but Sandor Clegane, however. So that's, of course, another story.
Again, I think my thoughts on morale of the Dornish people, like, this guy is like, I don't know, I served some lord who served some other lord who was on this side. Like, the people in Dorne, they don't know, they're even farther removed. This guy is closer to the home of this battle, if you will. But people from Dorne, they might not even know the name of the king. I guess they probably know the Targaryens, but yeah. But I'm just saying, they're farther removed. They would feel less commitment or loyalty or meaning behind this battle.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's such a, to think about it I love thinking about it from this perspective, as heart-wrenching as it can be. It's really important to take a look at all the different perspectives we can get, and what it seems like to Rhaegar thinks the world is in the balance. Robert thinks his honor and justice and what's been done to his friends is in the balance. This guy's like, two guys fighting over a woman? Is that really why we're here? And they're all not sharing the full picture because they don't know it. So these are all valid, but they're not. It means different things to different people. Nina mentions Raymond Derry's three older brothers also died at the Trident, which makes it a pretty bad day for House Derry. They lost 3 male heirs and their famous Kingsguard brother. We're not sure how Jonathor died. He died in the battle. We're not sure who killed him, but maybe someone nameless. It's a battle. It could be a number of things. He maybe took several wounds, and the last wound was just the straw that broke the camel's back, not some great heroic warrior that defeated a Kingsguard member at full strength. But maybe that is what happened. We have no idea with him. But yeah, it was a bad day for House Derry. House Derry just suffered a lot in general after the fall of House Targaryen.
Yeah, I was going to say, it might be worth all those losses if your side won.
Yeah.
Right? But they also now they're on the losing side. Yeah.
And then things got worse in the War of Five Kings, of course. Like, Gregor Clegane got a hold of their castle, and that never goes well. Someone I didn't mention in the intro, who was probably at the coronation, but definitely in the battle, was the only living POV to have participated, was Barristan Selmy. he is perhaps one of our best remaining chances to hear more about the battle. But he was taken out of the battle pretty early. Injuries almost killed him as well, kind of like Elder Brother. He took multiple wounds and eventually that was too much, and then he was unconscious. I don't know if Barristan was ever unconscious, but he wouldn't have seen Robert slay Rhaegar, most likely. He had been badly wounded 3 times. One with an arrow, by the way, which again implies charging into this fraught position. And the battle ended when Rhaegar fell, so Barristan wouldn't have been able to do anything more after that point as well. In fact, it's likely, had Barristan been at full strength, Robert would have had to go through him first to get to Rhaegar. I mean, this is Barristan Selmy we're talking about. This is the dude this is Duskendale guy. So he's not going to stand there while Robert advances on Rhaegar and just be like, you handle him, I'll fight this guy. No, he's going to, my prince, I'm here. That's his job, and we know he's always done his job for the most part. So, and this is Barristan the Bold. So Robert isn't going to just go through him, unless he's badly wounded already, which is what happened to Prince Lewin Martell when he fought Lyn Corbray. So quite possibly, by the time Rhaegar got to Robert, all 3 of the Kingsguard that he brought, 2 dead, 1 out of action, 2 badly injured to do anything. So basically out of it, effectively all 3 of them are out. And maybe that's when Robert and Rhaegar came together, because the Kingsguard were gone. Rhaegar's like, all right, it's too late to back down. Robert sees him. Robert's full of rage, so Robert's definitely going to go for him. Robert doesn't have a Kingsguard at this point. He's not officially king, but he's got his close friends around him. But they know Robert. They know his personality. He's riding out after Rhaegar. They're not going to catch him. He's got a head start. Like, yeah, go chase after him. I don't know. But and they may have just left it because they're like, well, Robert's got to do this one alone. This is personal between these 2. So that's a lot of really interesting decisions. A lot of different people that would have perceived this moment and have a variety of different thoughts going through their heads. Robert and Rhaegar among them, but not nearly the only 2. Whether it's Elder Brother, whether it's the foot soldier, whether it's Barristan's squire who maybe kept fighting. I'm completely inventing this person, but he had a squire. Rhaegar had another squire. Rhaegar had several squires. The other Kingsguard had squires. I mean, there's people who saw the final moment that happened. Here's the little...
Interesting that we don't get any direct accounts of it.
Yeah.
Just saying.
So here's the brief entry into the White Book about him that day. It's only 1 sentence.
Wounded by arrow, spear, and sword at the Battle of the Trident, whilst fighting beside his sworn brothers and Rhaegar, Prince of Dragonstone.
So seems to be confirmation they were right there with each other, which, I mean, that's a safe assumption anyway. I mean, maybe the way you can get separated in battle, but their job is to stick right by the Crown Prince, like very clearly, distinctly. So Sir Duncan sends a super chat, says, happy Sunday all, jumping in late today, but I'm sure it's been wonderful. Well, we're having a great time. I hope the rest of you all are as well. Let's keep it going. We used a movie title here, The Last Duel, for this section. There are several accounts of their actual showdown. Here's the one from The World of Ice and Fire. Quote,
the battle screamed about Lord Robert and Prince Rhaegar both, and by the will of the gods, or by chance, or perhaps by design, they met amidst the shallows of the ford. The 2 knights fought valiantly upon their destriers, according to all accounts. For despite his crimes, Prince Rhaegar was no coward. Lord Robert was wounded by the Dragon Prince in the combat, yet, in the end, Baratheon's ferocious strength and his thirst to avenge the shame brought upon his stolen betrothed proved the greater.
You can sort of see a little bit of The World of Ice and Fire's bias here, because the book was presented to Robert and his family, basically, and his descendants, but it was written with Robert in mind at first, and then, crossed out for Joffrey, crossed out for Tommen. I love that, for The World of Ice and Fire. But it's got to be a little favorable to the current regime, right? And, of course, it's not an eyewitness account. I don't think Maester Yandel was on the battlefield, but he may have interviewed people who were there. As we said, there would have been no shortage of people who would have been there. And Yandel would have had the means to buy you a drink and tell me about the Battle of the Trident. Eventually, he would have gotten some dirt or some info or some straight talk there'd be enough people to talk to. He's eventually going to find some purchase there. What do you think about that, Sean?
I've been holding back on this thought.
Okay.
But I wonder if it was less glorious than the picture is painted.
Probably.
I wonder if Rhaegar just fell off his horse and his leg was crushed. And then Robert just got off his horse and smashed him in the chest with his warhammer. And it wasn't his triumphant skill and courage in battle. He just got lucky and took advantage of the moment. Or some other person and chasing after Robert, trying to make sure he doesn't get himself killed, hit Rhaegar from behind, and then Robert gets credit for the kill. I could see a lot of it. The fact that we don't quite get a detail of it.
The final moment,
yeah, and
suspicious.
And I think that again, I've probably got some details a little mixed up in my head, but doesn't Dany's vision include Rhaegar like dropping to his knees?
Yeah, and whispering.
How does
the name
that
of
add up? Like, what from the moment they're on their horses fighting to when he drops to his knees? What happened in between there?
Yeah, how does he
get to the ground and go to his knees?
And he would be in a stream. He would be in water if he's on his knees too. Like there'd be water around him. Yeah.
Which, again, it's fine, but it's how does that get to the moment? Maybe Robert landed one blow or knocked him off the horse, and then Rhaegar struggles to his feet but can't stand and fall. I don't know. I could see. I'm struggling to piece together the different snippets that we get, but the fact that we don't get a clear description, not from Robert, not from Bellerston or the Maesters or anyone, makes me think that it might have been a little less than glamorous the way it actually ended.
I can see that.
Similar to how Ned killed Arthur Dayne. Maybe it was a little bit of like, less than honorable attack from behind by Howland Reed that allowed Ned to beat this superior.
That's a really good take. Now,
opponent.
Let me throw something that backs you up here out there. George is highly influenced by a certain series called The Dragonbone Chair. In that series, very mild spoiler here, folks, a certain king became king in part, gained some of his fame, because he went into a cave and slew this old dragon that had been a menace for a long time. But it turns out when he went in, the dragon was almost dead already. It was like old and decrepit. So, but he took full credit, and everyone's like, "Oh, he killed! Oh my God, you did it! A single person went in and killed him because the dragon's in there dead. It's got proof that his sword's in it. They didn't know that it was actually quite easy. So, and of course, most people don't even see the body, or it's just the rumor, and the rumor was all very positive and framed the way that made it look like he was this great hero. So, yeah. Now, Robert really did fight Rhaegar. That much we know. Like he may have gotten lucky. Rhaegar may have fallen off his horse, something like that. A stray arrow that isn't mentioned. You're right. So you're right to question the possibilities, but it may have also been as described. Here's Ned's memory of it. Let's get another take, which again isn't quite direct, as you'll see, but close.
They had come together at the ford of the Trident while the battle crashed around them. Robert with his warhammer and his great antlered helm, the Targaryen prince armored all in black. On his breastplate was the three-headed dragon of his house, wrought all in rubies that flashed like fire in the sunlight. The waters of the Trident ran red around the hooves of their destriers as they circled and clashed again and again until at last a crushing blow from Robert's hammer stove in the dragon and the chest beneath it. When Ned had finally come on the scene, Rhaegar lay dead in the stream, while men of both armies scrambled in the swirling waters for rubies knocked free of his armor.
So that seems to indicate Ned didn't see it happen. And we said when he finally came on the scene, but he must have seen a little because he's describing both of them in detail, especially the rubies flashing like fire in the sunlight. And Ned's not like a super poetic, descriptive guy. He's more like a military man, tell me what happened without all the poetry, just more of a straight efficiency. So, but there is a way to read this that he maybe saw part of it and then was distracted because he's busy fighting people on his own and caught glimpses. How do you kind of interpret this?
Yeah, I mean, maybe the scene of it might have cleared. People might have cleared around or been pointing at the distance, or someone told Ned, "Hey, there's Robert." And maybe even at the distance, you could see the flash of sunlight, especially depending on where the sun was in the sky or what angle Rhaegar was. The fact that Ned gives some of these details and he's not particularly poetic does make me think that he must have seen at least some flash of the image. But it still does not. Ned still does not describe the victory blow. the courageous moment.
Till at last,
he
stove in his chest.
At last he comes on the scene, and I'm telling you, I feel strongly that the final blow, the killing strike, was not to the chest of Rhaegar.
Oh, really?
I think that was after he was dead or immobilized.
And he slammed him
and
again.
That was Robert finishing him off.
Okay.
That wasn't like the way he killed him or the way he won. That was like an after the fact moment.
Okay. We know, he's clearly that happened in some form because of the rubies and all that. But you're right, he could have already been down. He would Robert so mad that he's just hammering him repeatedly because it's like, die,
Yes.
I mean, this is the same guy that 15 years later said, I should have killed her. It's like, you did kill him. He's like, only once. Right? So that does kind of sound like a guy that would be like, all right, he's dead. I'm done now. He's like, his rage wouldn't just be cooled the second Rhaegar's dead. It would take a little long. Yeah, I can see that. I mean, it's not a sure
I can think of a lot of other examples of the idea of someone being dead and someone beating him past what needs to be. I don't want to spoil, I don't know, Better Call Saul or other, Last of Us, other things out there along this line. But I can see him smashing him in the chest multiple times, even maybe he even wanted to just smash those rubies off his chest, and he hits it and his hammer just kind of clanks and it does and he does it 4 more times.
Yeah, do you really knock all 7 rubies free with one strike? I mean, that is maybe a little too clean, right? You're making some in or outs with this theory here, Sean. I like it. And Nina writes, even though Robert was huge and hugely talented, there's not a lot of argument that he was just really overmatching Rhaegar here. Rhaegar was very talented as well. He literally believed it was his destiny to be a warrior, but the savior of humanity for a while. At this point, he may have already... At this point, he figured out that wasn't him. At this point, he figured out it was his son, apparently. But still, it was his family that was going to do this, and it was his job to make all this happen. This is the son that he had just... and put in Lyanna, who wasn't even born yet. They just made this child together, and that kid isn't even born yet. So he's not done. So he still thinks he's a part of in Destiny mode, basically. And we also see, Barristan in his thoughts remembers Rhaegar as a great fighter. It's not just something he tells Dany, although he does that as well. It seems like he's being honest when he says that. Lots of people talk that Rhaegar was legitimately a good warrior. That doesn't seem like rewriting history or just pumping up a dead guy or whatever. And interestingly, Dany does see it. Here's her version of the House of the Undying, image of that very thing, with a lot of other things mixed in.
Then phantoms shivered through the murk, images in indigo. Viserys screamed as the molten gold ran down his cheeks and filled his mouth. A tall lord with copper skin and silver gold hair stood beneath the banner of a fiery stallion, a burning city behind him. Rubies flew like drops of blood from the chest of a dying prince, and he sank to his knees in the water, and with his last breath murmured a woman's name. Mother of dragons, daughter of death. Glowing like sunset, a red sword was raised in the hand of a blue-eyed king who cast no shadow. A cloth dragon swayed on poles amidst a cheering crowd. From a smoking tower, a great stone beast took wing, breathing shadow fire.
So that's...
Mother of dragons, slayer of lies. I'll say that again then. Mother of dragons, slayer of lies.
I'm just too excited to talk about it.
I was like, okay.
So it's really interesting. I almost didn't have Ashea read that second part because it's just all this continuing of the prophecy that doesn't really, or the vision that doesn't relate to this directly.
I was curious why you had me continue.
But it's because...
off.
Yeah, and they cut you off, yeah. Because it's just so interesting that it's included with these other things. This is the category it's thrown in. It's part of this dreamscape. And so I wanted to frame it, show what context it was placed in. A lot of it is other Targaryens dying. We've got Rhaegar dying, but before that, it's her brother getting the gold crown poured on him. Then Rhaego dying, her vision of what Rhaego would have been, a tall lord with copper skin, fiery stallion. That's a vision of what could have been with Rhaego. So we got Rhaego dying, Viserys dying, Rhaegar dying. It's like she's going back in time. And then it's her. And then it's a red sword raised in the hand of a blue-eyed king who casts no shadow. That's probably Stannis. And then a Cloth, who's maybe a fake version. And that's what we're talking about, Slayer of Lies. And the other fake version would be a cloth dragon swayed on poles amidst a cheering crowd. That's probably young Griff. And then a smoking tower, a great stone beast took wing, breathing. That one, I don't know. But it's probably some other false dragon reference. And these are in threes, right? Everything here about this vision is in threes. We got 3 Targaryen princes dying, Rhaegar, and Viserys, and 3 false Azor Ahais, perhaps. Stannis, young Griff, and whoever the smoking beast is. Maybe that's Euron or something. I don't know. Anyway.
Stone Beast?
Stone Beast. I don't know. Anyway, we're not trying to...
That'd be Grayscale?
Could be, absolutely. John Connington leading young Griff. So yeah, these are all possible things here. But it's super interesting that it appears amidst that. That's the point. We're not trying to figure out what all the things mean right now, if we ever will, but it's certainly interesting that it's framed this way and included that way. Dany also just thinks of Rhaegar at other times as a point of comparison, like when she's getting ready to unleash her battle plans on Meereen, especially the trick against the Sellsword Company, against the Second Sons led by Meera with getting them drunk and then doing the night attack. Dany wonders if Rhaegar was that kind of anxious, the kind of anxiety that she was feeling in that moment. She wonders if Rhaegar felt that when she saw the usurper's host across the Trident. So again, that's in the Storm of Swords, late in the Storm of Swords. So she's still thinking about Rhaegar, this brother she's never met, but she has had dreams of and seen him in her visions. So, Nina drops in an additional Bosworth comparison here. As we pointed out before, when Richard tried to kill Henry personally, and she adds a little detail, Richard actually killed Henry's standard bearer, a guy named Sir William Brandon, and unhorsed another Tudor supporter, John Chain. At one point, Richard was apparently within a sword length of Henry himself, and he didn't retreat. Henry did, but because he's, as Sean pointed out, the guy's not a warrior. Like, I don't want to fight you. I'm not a coward. It's just a stupid idea. Like, you're definitely gonna win. Like, why should I do this? You know, what's the logic here? So, but Nina says Richard just kept going though. He got surrounded by Henry's bodyguard and just kept on trying. Like, he didn't give up. He was Robert-like in his fury, just like, I'm gonna keep going. Like, if I fail, I fail. That's it.
Or like Rhaegar.
Rhaegar, yes.
Nina put in the quote, Richard's quote here. Win the battle as king or die as one.
Very nice. I like that quote. That's a good quote. Did he actually ever say that? Maybe not. But it might be Shakespeare. But it's still a great line. Let's pretend it's real. Another good example of this was Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great in the Battle of Granicus. No, the Battle of Gaugamela, which was the third and most decisive battle where he defeated the Persian Empire, defeated Darius, the great King Darius. Darius was on the field. Darius had like 7 or 8 times more men than Alexander. He had way more men, but Alexander's men were much higher quality. The same kind of thing where the Persian soldiers didn't have very much morale because they were just like, you have to come or we will kill you or your family. You know, it's that kind of thing. You must be here. Whereas Alexander, they didn't exactly have full authority over where they were and where they went, but they were treated a lot better. But they were in a foreign land. So he went straight for Darius with his cavalry charge, and Darius ran away. Even though he had it worked. So sometimes that plan does work. Cut off the head of the snake plan. That was his, I believe that's where the history books read it. They were like, cut off the head of the snake, and Alexander almost charged too far after him. After he kept running, they're like, I'm going to keep chasing you. And they're like, dude, slow down. Let's bring it back here. They caught him eventually.
So you're going to get enveloped by the enemy forces.
Yeah. So months later, they caught him, and one of his own men had killed him. One of his own former vassals killed him. Anyway, that's so there's military history supports strategies like this. This the main guy goes for the other main guy, to make it all very decisive and proved and end it quickly. But word spread quickly that Rhaegar was dead in this case. And here is a quote.
Birds flew and couriers raced to bear word of the victory at the Ruby Ford. When the news reached the Red Keep, it was said that Aerys cursed the Dornish, certain that Luwin had betrayed Rhaegar. He sent his pregnant queen, Rhaella, and his younger son and new heir, Viserys, away to Dragonstone, but Princess Elia was forced to remain in King's Landing with Rhaegar's children as a hostage against Dorne.
Mm-hmm. So again, blaming the Dornishmen. Look at this. Just Aerys just can't quit with his racism. Other notable names. I skipped over some of the results of what happened with some of these people. We have some of them I mentioned already. Remember, like Sir Bartimus saved Wyman Manderly's life, may have lost his own leg in the process of doing that. Crowfoot Umber was there. Both his sons were killed in the battle. We have Lewin Martell, as we said, was killed by Lyn Corbray after taking a lot of wounds. Barristan, recovered and Robert sent his maester to him. Sort of harkens to what happened to, which was it? Gawain Corbray, when Daemon Blackfire defeated him but didn't kill him. Daemon and Gawain mixed together is Dwayne. Daemon sent his own maester to help Gawain Corbray, and apparently that's that delay, that bit of nobility is cited as pivotal in losing the battle. I guess that covers all the specific mentions. We don't know what like the Bolton men did, whether they were specifically involved. And this is one of the reasons why I think a lot of the men that showed up to the battle didn't really have much to do. It's not like two full armies clashed because there's a ford. There's only a narrow range of engagement that can happen here. It's not like a big wide. So you hear of battles sometimes, ancient battles, where the front line can be like a mile, the stretching end to end. This is not like that. This was a narrow engagement, probably. Now, we don't know exactly how wide the fords were, and the ford can change in its width from day to day, given how high the river is running or lower. And again, that was one of the strategic considerations. Maybe the ford was low, and that was like, okay, this is our chance because we can send a lot of guys at once. If the river's high, we can only send a narrow group of people. Well, they're going to pick that off really easily if we can only send a narrow column. But if you can send a wide group, anyway. Point being,
there's also no opportunity for like forces to be split or flanking maneuvers or anything like that.
Yeah. So the
reduces the number of different people involved.
Right. So the focal area is very small. The actual engagement area is very small as compared to a lot of other battles. So that's really important to note. Which is why I think it's very possible that some of these lords that showed up had very little to do and just were like they could take all the credit and suffer very little. Be like, yeah, I was there that day. Never drew my sword, but I was there. I saw Rhaegar. I thought I saw a glimpse of Rhaegar in the distance, but that may have just been the sunlight, Let's see here. Scrolling back to where I was. Here's another quote about what happened once people realized. Like, Targaryen loyalists, think about what they're thinking. Think about one of the things that was keeping them loyal and the thing that kept them on their side. For one thing is their oath to follow the king. That's part of it. But you got to think that most of the loyalists, or at least a lot of them, were, again, thinking past Aerys. Like, okay, we're not really fighting for Aerys. We're really fighting for Rhaegar. Like, this guy's going to be king later. That's the guy we really care about. That's the one who we think is actually a decent guy. Now it's like, oh, he's dead. Aerys is still king. The morale drop must have been massive. Not only did they lose the battle, but the guy that they thought was the better of the two is dead now, and all of a sudden they're supporting the pyromaniac lunatic. I don't know that so many of them would have been that excited anymore about who they were fighting for. A lot of them weren't very excited about it in the first place. So you can see why they just... Well, here's the quote that describes the general chaos very succinctly.
Some men on both sides stopped fighting at once, leaping instead into the river to recover the precious stones, and a general rout quickly began as the royalists started fleeing the field.
So you got to think that, that when one side is running away, that's when the most casualties happen. That is a very standard truth of swords and spears and arrows type battles. Probably true of modern gunfire battles too, but different considerations are used with those. Anyway, when people are running away, they're running away. Their back is to you. They've dropped a lot of their heavy stuff. They're not trying to fight you, so you stab them in the back. This is actually when a lot of people most spring into action, because look at what happened with Elder Brother. He was looking for another horse, right? He can't be a knight anymore without a horse. All these people running away with their stuff. It's a chance to get easy loot. It sounds awful, sounds cruel, but it's true. That guy running away, he's got a nice helmet. I can get him. I didn't want to fight him face to face because he might kill me, but now he's running away. And he's a traitor. So you can kind of easily, maybe not easily, but you can, in the heat of battle, justify what you're doing. Even though after the fact, you might be like, man, I stabbed that guy in the back. That wasn't great, was it? But I'm not going to tell anybody. So, and it's like this. It's like, oh yeah, I won that in battle. You didn't say that you pulled it off a corpse you stabbed in the back. Like, you're guessing that maybe Robert's killing of Rhaegar wasn't quite so as noble as it sounded. Like a lot of these other low-key, everyone's running away, let me get some loot type of things happen. Let me find a new horse. Let me get a better spear. Let me get a jeweled scabbard. I don't know, lots of possibilities. It's an opportunity to advance your station in a world where it's kind of hard to advance, where you're very often stuck in poverty. So kind of understand why you would look for an opportunity to find maybe not just a ruby, but there's plenty of things of value on that battlefield from rich dead people. Or just
some people just need new shoes.
Yeah, right.
I'm telling
Yeah.
you, again, you got to remember, like, we usually, these stories are following the lords and the knights, but most of the soldiers in this battle were just farmers. They're just people struggling to get enough food to not starve, just got wrangled into this. And so just a new pair of shoes or gloves or something would be a boon to their life.
Yeah, you're totally right, Sean. Totally right. So remember, the blow that felled elder brother took him out of the action, and he floated downstream. He claims he was stripped of his goods first. Like, someone did the thing we're describing. He was in full kit when he got knocked unconscious, but when he woke up, he was naked. So someone pulled him out of the water, took his armor off, and threw him back in. And he floated downstream to the Quiet Isle, where he says 6 of Rhaegar's rubies have floated down. It's very symbolic, of course, because the 7th is maybe meant to refer to Sandor. 6 rubies from the 7 gods. The 7th god is the Stranger, and Sandor's horse is called Stranger. And yeah, again, just want to throw that out there because it's not exactly part of this. Sandor's thing is quite a bit later. He wasn't at the Battle of the Trident.
One thing I want to clarify, I think earlier you said something like all 7 of Rhaegar's rubies were knocked free.
Yeah.
In my mind, there were dozens and dozens of rubies. Just 6 that floated downstream that they found. They took that as a symbol.
Yeah, how do we know for sure there were 7?
The 7th. I think that there were, especially the idea that a bunch of people were scrambling for the rubies. I think there were probably like dozens of them.
Maybe.
And
I mean, 7 would make sense because of the
down,
gods, but you're right. There may be.
But if the entire dragon was done up in rubies, I think it would need more than 7.
I mean, but I think that people would be scrambling even if there were just 7 rubies. 1 ruby is enough to set you up and your family for life.
Yeah, you're totally right.
People would be scrambling. Yeah.
Yeah.
But if a bunch of people scramble for them, no one got any, or one person got one, maybe. I feel like a bunch of people got a bunch.
That is kind of interesting that
6
none of them
got
found
downstream, and the people who found those 6 are thinking symbolically like there's going to be a 7th.
Okay,
can't be sure, but that's just my interpretation.
It's a good take, though, Sean. I like that. Yeah, obviously we don't know for sure, but I like that. I like that interpretation. Nina says, according to legend, after the battle at Bosworth, Richard's crown was found hanging on a hawthorn bush, and Henry was supposed to have been crowned on the battlefield by his supporter and stepfather, Lord Stanley. There's the Lord Stanley you mentioned earlier, Sean, the Lord Frey of equivalent. Whether or not that actually happened, it certainly reminds Nina of the scramble for Rhaegar's rubies in the waters of the ford that happened after the battle. Yeah, good call, good call. Okay, let's talk about a little aftermath. A very famous and poetic quote from Sir Jorah to set up a little anecdote here.
At the Trident, those brave men Viserys spoke of who died beneath our dragon banners, did they give their lives because they believed in Rhaegar's cause, or because they had been bought and paid for? Dany turned to Mormont, crossed her arms, and waited for an answer.
My queen, the big man said slowly, all you say is true, but Rhaegar lost on the Trident. He lost the battle, he lost the war, he lost his kingdom, he lost his life. His blood swirled downriver with the rubies from his breastplate, and Robert the Usurper rode over his corpse to steal the Iron Throne. Rhaegar fought valiantly, Rhaegar fought nobly, Rhaegar fought honorably, and Rhaegar died.
Oh, what a great quote. That's one of the biggest ones, right? But what Jorah is leaving out is I was on Robert's side in that battle. I don't want to mention that, but I fought for the usurper. I also stepped over the corpse to help him steal the Iron Throne. He just conveniently leaves that out. Oh boy.
Might also explain why he didn't get knighted. You know, maybe he did something knight worthy, but who's going to knight someone on the losing side?
No, he was on the winning side.
Oh, on the winning side.
That's why he doesn't mention it, because
the opposite side.
He doesn't want Daddy to know he fought for the usurper. But like you said, he probably just didn't fight. Like he maybe didn't. It was over before he had a chance to do anything. But Dany's question is a little flawed. She says, "Did they give their lives because they believed in Rhaegar's cause, or because they had been bought and paid for?" Neither. In the case of Elder Brother, he said, "Well, I was ordered to be here. I don't really know why exactly what side we fought. You know, he says that part was above him. It's like way above his pay grade. He's not even sure. Like he's so far removed from that decision, he doesn't even understand it or have context. He just gets that's how it works. And well, he was going to be on one side or the other. That's how it always goes. So,
and that shows, not to be too much of a knock on Dany, because she just is young and naive.
Yeah.
There's just no two ways about it. But it does show that she doesn't, and again, she's trying to gain further understanding. Maybe she's being snarky with Jory here, but she is trying to get some insight, which she needs, because she doesn't understand this idea that that's not the only two reasons that people fight.
Yeah.
Most of the people that end up fighting are just drug into it.
Yeah. And of course, the context here is she's deciding whether or not to buy the Unsullied. Yeah. That's important to throw out there. So what's neat about the Ruby Ford is it's not the first time that we have a place that gets a name because of a battle. The Redgrass Field and the first Blackfire Rebellion, or Bitterbridge in Maegor's War versus the Faith. Those were not names that existed prior to those incidents. Nina says, perhaps in partly just in general to point this out, but also in reference to Jorah saying he rode over Rhaegar's corpse to steal the Iron Throne. That's a little unfair. Robert was very known for being very kind to the defeated. Maybe not Rhaegar, but Rhaegar's body was cremated, which is in line with Targaryen beliefs. So Robert allowed the normal burial practice to happen. And of course, he also, at the same time, we know he sent his maester to help Barristan Selmy after Roose Bolton's like, you should cut his throat. And read the room, Roose. This is Robert Baratheon. He pardons everyone. Like, he's famous. He's kind of famous for that, like for making friends into foes. People still to the beginning of the story before Robert's dead, they're like, Robert was really good at turning foes into friends. And people still, remember someone said that to Stannis' face, and they were like, don't do that. Don't bring that up to Stannis. Like, because Stannis is not good at that. He was kind of jealous of that. Stannis is more likely to turn friends into foes than foes into friends.
Another interesting note, in the aftermath of that Bosworth battle, Henry did at first start off, purging enemies, but he switched and eventually said, nah, it doesn't matter if you fought against me before. Join forces with me now.
Little conciliation there, which is kind of that's why Jaehaerys was called the Conciliator. He did that sort of thing quite a bit. Now, Nina also points out it's very important that they burned Rhaegar's body publicly as well from a political standpoint, because you don't want someone showing up pretending to be Rhaegar. Like if he's like, oh, did the prince really die? Was it, that kind of thing. Just to be absolutely sure no one comes along later and claims to be Rhaegar. Because, as we saw, someone did come along later and claim to be Rhaegar's son. So this sort of thing does happen. There's like, oh yeah, they could do that with this kid too. Nina says, another Bosworth comparison here. Following the end of the battle and the death of King Richard, his body was stripped naked and exposed for everyone to see that he had died, just to prove it was him, remove all doubt. It may have been treated substantially worse than Rhaegar's was. Of course, we don't actually hear about Rhaegar's corpse being treated badly, but Richard's corpse seemed to have sustained some symbolic mutilations, which kind of part of the medieval and ancient world that you would do that. You desecrate a corpse.
I'm going to argue that's what Robert did. I'm going to argue he just smashed his hammer into his chest multiple times after he was already dead anyway.
I could see it. I really could. That's a great... I've never heard that before, Sean, but it really does fit. Again, it's one of those things that we can't be sure of, but it really does. Robert thought of himself as a hero. It's a good segue to that. And as we've been saying, there's a lot of reasons for him to think that way. He was doing the kind of things that you're supposed to do when you're treated the way he was treated. If you look at it from a narrower perspective. So noble behavior like this was just part and parcel of his approach. He was already kind of this kind of man. He didn't do it because it was politically expedient. Robert isn't really like that. Robert doesn't get coaxed, or he's just as bad as Robert is. He had a lot of great qualities, and those were really on display at this stage. Great charisma, forgiveness, that's a big one, mercy. But also just he has a lack of guile, which I think you can kind of appreciate that sometimes. Like a guy who just always speaks his mind. Sometimes it's rude, it's boorish, it's insulting, it's annoying. But at least it's not dishonest. You know what's on his mind. And I think at a time like this, it works really well because he's like, I'm revenging Leon. We're in the, he's going to yell all the right things to get people fired up and they would agree with him. And no one's going to think of him as a liar because he's just such a forthright guy, even if his flaws hadn't emerged yet by this point. So yeah, we talk about the pardon of Roose. Nina says it's a brilliant move. Immediately and maybe in tandem with burning Rhaegar's body, Robert demonstrated that he was not here to exact vengeance or universally condemn those who had fought for the Targaryens. It was just to establish something new and better, give a little bit of continuity by having, not only did he pardon Barristan, he named him the new Lord Commander. So that it wasn't as simple as just a regular pardon, you may continue. It was, you're now my number one. You fought right next to Rhaegar. You fought well for Rhaegar. Do that for me. And he did. I mean, Barristan did stay loyal to Robert until Cersei ripped his will up and they fired him, right? Now, Barristan also would have gotten very upset had he been there for the murder, seen the bodies of the Targaryen children. But he was still recovering from his wounds, so that was kind of a convenient bit of separation there. But Barristan still does remember that and has a moment of rage when thinking about it. So let's talk about the last little bit here, the Lion and the Kraken. Tywin had been waiting. Most likely he had scouts. Like we said, the other armies were probably aware of him being there. But more likely, if not both, if only one, Tywin knew where they were and they didn't know where he was. Still, I think they all knew where they all were. But if anyone was concealed, it was Tywin. So as he explained it, I think to Tyrion and to others maybe, they had to make it absolutely clear whose side they were on. They didn't do that by a great display of loyalty to Robert. They did it with a great dramatic insult, bit of violence against the Targaryens to make sure that no one's ever going to believe that this house will side with the Targaryens again, or that the Targaryens would accept them because of what they've done. And that was Tywin's thinking, like, do something brutal and savage. No one's ever going to consider us as siding with them again. Our loyalty can be depended on because how could we possibly work with them? How would they ever accept us back? That meant doing this dirty work, stuff that Robert didn't want to be seen doing because he's, again, painted as a hero. So Tywin not only saw the opportunity to get in good with the new regime and to completely divorce themselves from the old one, he stepped in and did something that he knew Robert wouldn't want to do. And he used his worst men to do it. He sent Sir Amory Lorch and Gregor Clegane. Yikes. Now that one's pretty well known. The sack of King's Landing, what happened next. Pycelle was like, yeah, let him in. And Varys was like, don't let him in. And for once, Varys was the one who was right. And Pycelle...
Wait, Varys or Pycelle?
Varys was right. He's like, don't let him in. Oh. And Pycelle was like, no, that's Tywin. He's here to help us. You know, Pycelle always has too high opinion of Tywin. And Varys was like, no, that dude is here to do what he did. Varys immediately knew what was up. And yeah, Varys was right. So lesser known, though, is that Kellon Greyjoy, father of Baelon, Euron, Victarion, and them, did a very similar thing. His sons pushed him to join the war during it, appealing to him in a variety of ways. Loot, honor, anything, reasons. They just really wanted him to get involved because, hey, we want to go fight. We want to be involved. It didn't work, though, until Rhaegar's death. And at which point, again, Baelon, Euron, Victarion are like, the Targaryens are done. We got to do something. We got to, A, prove where we stand, kind of like what Tywin was doing. B, loot. The same sort of everyone's running away. In the microcosm of everybody running away in the battle, now's our chance to stab them in the back and grab stuff. Same here for the Ironborn. They're like, the Reach is flailing. They've just lost. Let's get them. And that's what happened. Attack some loyalists, prove where you're at. Ironically, which is always the right phrase to use when discussing the Ironborn, they didn't attack at full strength because they were concerned with what the Lannisters would do. Of course, the Lannisters were doing the same thing they're doing. Even more ironically, Kellon was killed in this fairly meaningless skirmish where they were just trying to get some loot from the Shield Islanders, which is a nice prelude to Euron coming back to the Shield Islands many years later. But Kellon's death, right there in this meaningless skirmish, meant that Baelon ascended the Season chair just as Robert was ascending the Iron Throne, setting the stage for his rebellion 7 years later. At the start, we showed a number of examples of the Battle of the Trident right at the beginning of A Song of Ice and Fire in several point of views. Does it continue to be mentioned a lot 4 books later, even after George has expanded the story so much? Absolutely yes. Perhaps Ned didn't like thinking about it too much. The memories of it are too adjacent to memories of Lyanna. It's bitter. He doesn't want to think about that. But Connington, His bitter memories are fuel. That's what drives him. For a chance to set things right. At least, the way he sees it. Quote,
Robert escaped me and cut down Rhaegar on the Trident. I failed the father, he said, but I will not fail the son.
But he's not the only one. Check out this quote from Sir Barristan.
I swore no oath to Dorne, Sir Barristan told himself, but Lewin Martell had been his sworn brother, back in the days when the bonds between the Kingsguard still went deep. I could not help Prince Lewin on the Trident, but I can help his nephew now.
That didn't work out so great either. That's Quentin Martell he's talking about. He did try, though. He did tell him, like, dude, you should leave. But, yeah. I mean, it would have been like telling Robert to leave or Rhaegar not to go after Robert. Like, he's going to do this. He's going to try for the dragon or whatever. Well, I don't think Barristan knew exactly what he was going to do. He just thought he was going to persist trying to marry Daenerys. If he knew he was going to go for the dragons, he might have tried something else. And if Barristan knew Rhaegar was going to go straight for Robert, maybe he didn't know that. Maybe he didn't know that was going to happen. Maybe that was something Rhaegar kept to himself. Okay, let's talk about prophecy and foreshadowing, because of the fact that the Battle of the Trident still echoes throughout the story, might mean there's going to be some maybe rehashing, or maybe it's going to have a parallel to something that happened, or multiple parallels to things that have yet to come. For example, Dany seeing his death in a vision. What about what's going to come with regards to that? There's a prophecy stated around the time of the Dance of the Dragons that said many had heard the prophecy that the hammer would smash the dragon. Like, that has its own relevance in that timeline, but of course it's easy to look at that and be like, oh, they were talking about 150 years later when Robert killed Rhaegar. But of course, like a lot of prophecies written about in history books, it was probably a post-facto prophecy, something invented after the fact. But maybe not. In a world that actually has prophecies, you can't throw the idea out. A most mysterious possibility exists for us in the future of A Song of Ice and Fire. Consider this dream of Dany's.
That night she dreamt that she was Rhaegar, riding to the Trident. But she was mounted on a dragon, not a horse. When she saw the usurper's rebel host across the river, they were armored all in ice, but she bathed them in dragon fire, and they melted away like dew, and turned the Trident into a torrent. Some small part of her knew that she was dreaming, but another part exulted. This is how it was meant to be. The other was a nightmare, and I have only now awakened.
So she discovers Quaithe in the room with her shortly after, and Quaithe says, no one else is going to see you, or no one else is going to hear me. Only I can see you, or only you can see me, which makes it very much sound like a projection from a glass candle, because that's the only mechanism we know of that can do that. So this is perhaps part of Quaithe encouraging Dany to take on her destiny as Azor Ahai, which might point to it being a direct thing coming in the future of her battling the others at the Trident. That would mean they got really far south. Or maybe it's just her Trident is Winterfell, where she'll battle them up there, or her Trident is the Wall. The Wall could be seen as a river, a frozen river maybe in a dreamscape. I don't know. There's possibilities here. The point is, it doesn't have to literally be the Trident, but it could be, which would be pretty amazing. No matter what happens, even if the battles to come are more impactful and more memorable than the Battle of the Trident, it's unlikely the people of Westeros will forget about it anytime soon. And it will probably continue to get mentioned here and there in A Dream of Spring and A Dance with Dragons and whatever else gets written. Dornish James says, I think the symbolism of 6 and 1 missing works multiple ways. There's this thing with the stranger, but also the idea of 1 being missing hints at Jon and being part of Rhaegar's bloodline being missing, especially if Aegon Young Griff is denoted as Aegon the 6th, then Jon would potentially be Aegon the 7th.
Yeah.
A couple things have to happen to make that happen. For example, his name has to actually be Aegon, which is no sure thing. But you can see how that would fit. Yeah. Kolniski says, they will find the 7th ruby in stranger's manure. That's awesome. I love that. Head cannon, or more like ass cannon in this case. Ooh, ass cannon. Yikes. What kind of device is that? That's a kind of ordinance that I don't want to face.
Maybe you do.
Oh, maybe you do.
God. End this episode now. Jesus.
We'll clean things up a lot next week with our Baelor the Blessed episode, who would never speak of such things. Everything he does is pure white and clean and virgin holy. Yes.
Virgin holy.
Virgin holy, yes. I made that
That's
up.
virgin
One word.
holes.
Or is it hyphenated? Virgin-holy. Yeah, why is olive oil extra virgin? What does that even mean? No one's ever even thought about sleeping with it. Yeah, okay. Trivia question. Let's wrap that one here. I bet a few people got this one. The question again was which rebel slew 3 landed lords and/or knights of the Narrow Sea in battle, and the answer is Lord Jason Mallister.
Yes, some people did get that.
Yes, it said when Catelyn sees him passing, Catelyn's in disguise with Sir Roderick, and Jason Mallister passes by, and she's a little like, "Oh, will he recognize me?" And he doesn't, but she thinks about how he rides a horse like a man who has never known fear, and how he threw 3 of Rhaegar's bannermen on the Trident. Like, dang, that guy, don't forget about him. He's still alive, by the way. That dude's around. He's still the Lord of Seaguard. He's the father of Patrick Mallister. Patrick's the one who befriended Theon, much to Lord Jason's chagrin. He's like, we fight our whole purpose. We're Seaguard. Like, we were built to defend against Ironmore. In fact, I killed Theon's brother, Lord Jason. And remember, and Patrick is like, is that a problem between us? He's like, you only say that because you never knew my brother. He's like, if you knew my brother, you would think, no, that's not a problem. I have no loyalty towards that guy. So, yeah, I think that was Maron. Maron or Roderick. Roderick one of them was killed attacking Seaguard, which, talk about going like a dumb thing to do. Let's attack the castle built to defeat us. And the other one died in the defense of Pike when the war was ending. Anyway, so yes, next week, Baelor the Blessed with Nina. That's going to be a lot of fun. Very different style topic, but we're still talking Targaryens. There'll be some dreams and prophecies involved because we know those were in his head. His style of vision and prophecy was a bit more of the 7 and a little less of dragons, but we got to figure some dragons may have gotten in there too. Some other episodes we mentioned that you want to stay immersed. The Blackfire Rebellion series has some very serious and similar echoes, especially the Redgrass Field Battle episode, which we do have a little more detail on the actual battle there, but still a different style episode. A lot of Valar Rhaegar stuff would come up here. Dany's House of the Undying chapters, which are in Clash of Kings. I think that's her 4th chapter. Jon Connington chapters, of course. Ned, Barristan. So really, Valar Rhaegar is full of opportunities to immerse yourself in these related topics rather than some of our standard scripted or weekly episodes. But your mileage may vary, and you choose what you like. We appreciate it. Anyway, we always thank you for listening. Thanks as well to those of you who support us financially on Patreon or Spotify. You can become a member and get access to bonus episodes. That's certainly another way to get immersed. Our large bonus episode catalog is available on either platform. We have different additional bonuses on Patreon. We're not able to put those on Spotify just yet because their platform is newer in terms of offering direct support from listeners, but they are adding to it all the time. So you pick the one that works better for you. We also have regular donations through PayPal you can make through our website, or just support our sponsors, Smile Brilliant, or any of the other sponsors you see us listed on our website. Big thanks to Nina for her notes today. Check out goodqueenalley.tumblr.com and check her out live next week on the show. Thanks to Joey. Sorry, Sean?
Oh, go ahead.
Okay. Thanks to Joey, Jesse, and Brand for our music and intros. Thanks to Michael Klarfeld as well for the intro and for our maps. Michael is such a great contributor to all the things that make our show look more, real.
He's working on the Stormlands right now.
Yeah, that's right. It's exciting.
I just wanted to say that I've got my 10 1-minute movie reviews up for the different Academy Award nominees.
Dancing Sean on YouTube.
I'm going to drop a link to that in the chat. But y'all, if you had trouble finding it after we mentioned it last time, it's because Dancing Sean is one word, and it's SEAN, like scene.
Yeah, there are a lot of ways to
But,
spell Sean, so you may not
yeah,
know.
but yeah, if you look up it 2 words, you won't find it.
Also, sometimes YouTube thinks you're looking for dancing scene, and especially with movies that have dancing scenes in them, it's like
A lot of movies have dancing scenes in them, yes. But there's only one Dancing Sean, and that's you. So yeah, check out Dancing Sean's reviews of the best pictures. He's very good at it, and you've been getting just steadily better at it all the time. The more you work on this, the stronger your content gets. And that's a great thing. So yeah, folks, Sean's movie reviews are really good.
Mm-hmm.
That's it, everybody. We'll see you next week for more. And you know what to do. Valar, reread us.